Smoothen Silky, Demon Fighting Pimp, Grindhouse Chronicles, Volume 1, written by Derek Slayton, narrated by William Wells. Chapter 1. The atmosphere inside the guilty growler was as enticing as a hobo orgy. As soon as Rose set foot inside, she was assaulted with crunchy power chords and the underlying musk of daily drunks that hadn't showered in weeks. Boisterous bellowing permeated the crowd from a group of half-drunk frat boys in pink polo shirts clustered around the end of the bar. The walls were grungy, with nicotine and spat beer, dented from years of punk rockers smashing around with abandon. The soles of Rose's thigh-high boots stuck to the floor as she circled the throng of sweaty rockers. She managed to move with grace despite this and swung up onto a bar stool, careful to keep her flowing black dress from brushing against any spilled muck. She lived a glamorous life. When she crossed her legs and leaned forward to rest a delicate-looking arm on the bar, her green eyes swept the room in a quick arc. One of the pink shirts leaned in, yelling to his friends about something over the music, and when he motioned to her, she sighed. Predictable little university kids with their fake swagger and unending bullshit. The band screamed one last garbled line into their far too cranked microphones, and the frontman leapt into the crowd. The cacophony of notes ringing out died down, and the stage lights lowered, house lights brightening and breaking the anonymous spell of the dance floor. Drunken dancers that had been slamming into each other hollered and stumbled over each other, eyes adjusting to the ambient light. Some stared awkwardly at their previous dance partners, unsure of whether or not they were still interested in spending more time together. Rose didn't envy them. "We don't get too many women like you in here," the bartender said as he stepped in front of her, taking advantage of the fresh quiet to address this new customer. He took in her plump lips and flawless skin, leading down a slender neck to a prominent collarbone and the swell of luscious cleavage beneath. The bartender was middle-aged and may have been handsome once, but at this point, he looked like he'd been around the block too many times. He was rough around the edges, and not in the way that Rose usually found intriguing or endearing. He seemed like he was the perfect embodiment of the guilty growler. What kind of name was that for a bar anyway? It made her envision a very sad-looking pussy. "What can I say?" she shrugged, sweeping her waterfall of crimson curls over her shoulder. "I like the atmosphere." "Hey, baby, how you doing?" It was the pink shirt that had been motioning to her moments ago, and she rolled her eyes. "Well, at least I did like the atmosphere," she said to the bartender, and his lips curled into a wry smile. The exchange went right over Frat Boy's head. She wasn't surprised. It was amazing that these dolts made it into post-secondary with their empty heads. They sure didn't have any street smarts in her experience. "Hey, buddy, get my new girl here whatever she wants." He didn't take his eyes off of Rose's blush pink lipstick as he spoke, pulling a $20 bill out of an obscenely fat wallet. "I'll take a double scotch on the rocks," she said, eyeing Frat Boy's wallet as he made a show of how difficult it was to fold it back up. "And the change," she added, and the bartender stifled a chuckle. He liked her sass and the way she was playing this kid. These fraternity idiots were just as out of place as this chick. He didn't normally attract their type of crowd, and wondered if they'd headed out here on a dare. Kids these days still dared each other to do shit, right? "Coming right up, ma'am," the bartender said, and turned to pluck the bottle of scotch from the wall behind him. "So, what's up, baby?" Frat Boy tried to turn up the charm, leaning in a bit with a leer that made Rose's skin crawl. "I'm Moses. You come here often?" His blue eyes were slightly hooded, and he eyed her like he was sizing her up for purchase. In a way, he was. That's what guys in bars did. She wondered briefly if this guy had ever successfully picked up a woman in his miserable little life. The bartender slid a surprisingly clean full glass of amber liquid across the bar with a smattering of bills behind it. "First off," "My name is Rose, not Baby," she said, voice level, and lifted her drink in her perfectly manicured hand. "Second off," she began, and then shot back the drink in an expert display of opening her throat. She slammed the empty glass back down on the counter and smacked her painted lips together in disappointment. "If he keeps pouring drinks like that, then no, I won't be coming here often." The bartender huffed as she folded up the extra bills and slid them into the top of her dress. She spun the stool so she was facing away from the bar, watching the band packing up their instruments. They'd been good, at least for a punk band whose job was to just make as much noise as possible. If she were here for pleasure, she'd have been shaking the drummer's sweaty hand right about then. He'd been throttling those drums like his life depended on it, and moving one's entire body in such a fast rhythm was beyond her. Moses snapped his fingers to catch the attention of the bartender. "Yo, dude, get your ass over here," he said pompously, and the older man leaned towards him with his lips pursed. "You are going to pour her the strongest drink you got, 'cause I plan on getting me some of that tonight. You got it?" The pink-clad boy motioned to Rose, and the bartender raised his eyebrows, abashed. "I said you got it?" Moses clenched his fist for effect, and the bartender rolled his eyes. "Yes, sir, I'll take care of it," he replied, trying to keep his professionalism in check. He didn't want any trouble with these university kids, but this woman had insulted him and his drinks. If she wanted to stoop to screwing a pack of frat boys, then that was her prerogative. He swallowed his sense of moral conduct and started pouring some very old and not terribly legal German moonshine into a glass. There was a plunk on the wooden bar, and Rose glanced back at the new drink the bartender had procured for her. It looked like cloudy water, and she raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow, catching a whiff of fermented fruit and maybe honey. That definitely was not a regular drink for a fine upscale establishment. $5, please, ma'am," the bartender informed her, and her mouth curled down into a pensive frown. She hadn't ordered the damn thing, and she sure as shit wasn't going to pay for this swill, whatever it was. She turned a manipulatively softening gaze at Moses, green orbs big and round and oh so inviting. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out, and he reached blindly to grasp the bills that had been sitting by her previous drink. When he remembered that she'd shoved them in her bra, he almost scowled, but then caught her fuck-me eyes again. "Fine," he groaned, and produced his ridiculous wallet once more. "Thank you." She batted her eyelashes at him as he paid for the drink. "Moses, my name's Moses," he blurted, wanting to hear his name come from out between those squishy, cock-sucking lips. "I don't care, sweetie." A ghost of a smile crossed her face, and she turned back to the crowd, fresh drink in hand, to watch the patrons fully disperse. She wasn't surprised that none of them were sticking around for last call, based on the quality of drinks in this dive. Even the rest of Moses's frat friends strolled out the door, not even looking back to see what their buddy was doing. They probably assumed that he was going to pick Rose up and didn't want to get in the way. Maybe the plan was for him to be by himself, oh so harmless and inviting, to get her to head over to the frat house where, surprise, there are 4 more dudes to fuck. Not tonight, bucko, Rose thought bitterly. Moses took a deep breath and leaned in again, going in for another try. "Well, I'll give you a reason to care," he purred, lowering his voice into what he thought was a sexy husk. "Why don't we go back to my place and I'll part your Red Sea?" The red-haired woman in the black strapless dress froze, and then very slowly turned her head to look at him. He was smirking at her with false bravado, clearly nervous about how she was going to respond. She tried to keep a straight face. She really did. But she couldn't stop the laughter bubbling up from inside her. It came in massive waves, and she had to support herself on the bar to keep from spilling her drink as she nearly doubled over. She gasped for breath, great heaving guffaws sucking the life out of her lungs, and the more she tried to stop, the worse it got. She squeaked out unintelligible words as she cackled, trying to say something, anything to make it stop. Her gut ached. Moses frowned, almost pouted. The bartender's head dropped into his hands, and he stifled his own laughter, making a mental note to add this kid to his list of losers that couldn't pick up women. He'd be a proverbial cash cow, buying drinks for chicks that would never go home with him. Seriously? Rose finally managed to wheeze the word. Does that line ever work? She slammed a fist down on the bar to accentuate another fit of giggles. Part my Red Sea? She set her drink down to avoid dumping it all over herself, though she was sure some had already sloshed onto the floor in her mirth. I don't even know what to do with that. I'm speechless. Moses shoved off the bar stool with a snarl and stormed out of the building, slamming the front door behind him. Rose leaned her head on her elbow, laughs subsiding to little hiccups as she turned her amused eyes on the bartender. As you can see, we get some really sad individuals in this place. He spread his hands for effect. Yeah, I can see that. She shook her head and downed the drink, nearly spitting it back up as she giggled again. Is it too late to get one more? I'm afraid so, he said, and glanced at the clock. It was past last call. She shrugged in understanding, looking apologetic for asking. But he put up a hand. However, he stated, scooping up the scotch bottle once more, after seeing what you had to go through, I think I can make an exception. He smiled as he poured the drink, genuinely feeling that this woman deserved the extra drink. However insulting she'd been at the beginning, she dealt with that university kid with sass and style. The bartender couldn't help but respect her for having such a thick skin. The door burst open just as he was sliding the glass across the bar, and Rose swiveled to see Moses return. He was flanked by the 4 nearly identical clones of him, pink shirts and all. Their eyes were maniacal with rowdy glee, and she pursed her lips, a small sigh escaping her lips. They did not look like they wanted to play nice. Chapter 2. Okay, fellas, you all had your shot with the ladies, but we're closed, the bartender said in a jovial but firm tone. He didn't like the look of these assholes, especially busting back in here after the show between Rose and Moses. He didn't think that him returning with his pack of puppies was a good sign, and hoped he could defuse the situation. Go on home and sleep it off. The 5-pack ignored the nervous-looking man and stalked toward Rose like predators circling prey. Don't worry, I deal with this all the time. She threw a wink back at the bartender to calm him down, but also as a display of relaxed dominance to the frat boys. She wanted them to know that they weren't rattling her cage one bit with their attempt at intimidation. Is this the bitch? One of the pink shirts spat, and she leaned back on her elbows, crossing her mile-long legs casually. Yeah, that's her, Moses confirmed. Let's teach her a lesson. Nobody laughs at Moses. That's enough, boys, the bartender cut in, despite Rose's insistence that she could handle herself. Leave now, or I'll call the cops. He wasn't about to let 5 guys at this one woman, no matter how chill she was about the whole situation. You shut the fuck up, Moses growled, a deep guttural noise that made the bartender's blood run icy cold. The frat boy's wide eyes had an eerie glint to them, and the man behind the counter could swear that his skin was pulsing. This is between me and the bitch, Moses continued, his voice having dropped 2 octaves. Rose hopped down off of the bar stool as if heading off to catch a ride home, and the pink-clad guy's hand shot out lightning fast to grasp her bicep. You just fucked up bad, frat dick. She narrowed her eyes and slipped her hand instantly down into her boot, producing a retractable police baton. Steel slinked out and expertly hit flesh with a loud smack. Moses let go of her arm to grasp his cheek in shock. That reaction earned him 2 more hits, leaving a matching welt on the other side of his face and a far more painful strike to his twig and berries. Rose reeled forward with her pointed toe boot and slammed it into his stomach, knocking the wind right out of him. She wound her fingers into his hair and jerked him to the floor, stomping on his ribs with a grunt. His 4 buddies were positively vibrating with excitement, their eyes emanating that same shiny glow of their comrade. One of them lunged forward, and Rose dodged out of reach, vaulting up onto the bar. The bartender dropped to the floor like a stone, seeking refuge under the counter. Rose ran down the length of the bar, sliding off the end to dart into the next room. She needed to funnel them somehow, take them one at a time. Unfortunately, they knew better than to pop into the room in a perfect line, and bustled in all together. Moses parted them like the Red Sea, and the image made Rose snicker at his awful pickup line once again. "You little bitch," he snarled, his lips curling back to reveal double rows of razor-sharp teeth. "I'm gonna take your soul for that." The frat boys all started to glow together, their skin darkening and hardening into scaly flesh. Their teeth grew longer, their eyes redder, their noses upturned into little buttons on their faces. They looked more like hairless, scaly pugs, and Rose couldn't help but grin at the image. She widened her stance, preparing to defend herself as best she could against the onslaught of frat pug demons. "Prepare to die!" Moses's voice was unrecognizable. Rose opened her mouth to make a snarky comment regarding his cliched speech, but a sharp whistle cut through the empty bar beyond the door. The lights from the dance floor were bright enough that the fluffy humanoid silhouette remained in shadow as his heels clicked along the floor. "Now, I know y'all ain't thinking of hurting that pretty little thing." His soft drawl was sly and intimidating all at once as he reached the doorframe. When the light from the small room illuminated a man in a long, impeccably white suede coat, it was as if all the air went out of the room. He grinned and reached beneath the long garment, producing a shiny 9-iron. He set it in front of him with a flourish, head down on the floor, as if it were a cane. "Who the fuck are you?" Moses blurted, incredulous. This guy looked like he'd just walked out of a costume store, and to waltz up in here and interrupt their important business? "Silky," the pimp said, voice matching his name. "Smoothen Silky." "Well, Silky," Moses addressed him with a sneer, "you picked the wrong whore to stick up for. Looks like we're gonna have to take your soul too." He shoved one of his buddies in the shoulder, and the pink-clad demon lunged forward, a flurry of clawed fists. Silky planted his feet and easily dodged each punch, the demon getting more and more frustrated and sloppy as his lashes continued to miss. Finally, the pimp flicked the golf club upwards, catching the frat boy in the chin. The demon staggered back, and there was a little shink as a blade slipped out of the end of the club. Silky jabbed forward and embedded the blade right into the first demon's crotch, eliciting a piercing shriek that had the rest of his buddies covering their scaly ears. Rose leaned against the back wall, crossing her arms to watch the action. Another frat boy leapt forward, and Silky flipped the 9-iron with expert grace, swinging it in a quick arc that decapitated his attacker like butter. Moses screamed in rage, shoving his other 2-pack mates forward as Silky did a backflip out onto the dance floor. His fur coat billowed in a fluttering arc, and when he landed in a power stance, somehow not dislodging the majestic hat from atop his head, he held the club out to the side and jutted his free hand forward, flipping it palm up and motioning for the demons to come hither. The first one to get close led with his fist, and Silky grasped him at the tricep, slicing up with the bladed club. The demon squealed like a pig as the pimp tore his arm clean off, tossing it in the air like a graduation cap. He used the momentum to spin and fling the club at his furthest attacker as the armless body crumpled to the floor in shock. Spinning with the ferocity of a lawnmower blade, the weapon slicked clean through the demon's throat, embedding itself in the far wall. Blood waterfalled downwards, staining the pink polo with crimson, and the glow of his eyes flickered out as he expired. The head toppled over onto the floor and rolled perfectly into the doorframe, the dead, shocked expression causing panic to bubble up in Moses like a fountain. "What are you gonna do now, pimp?" he yelled at the man who had just single-handedly killed his crew. "You're unarmed." Silky simply grinned, gold grill glinting in the tungsten lights, illuminating the word Silky embedded in his mouth. The severed arm dropped into his waiting hand with a squelch. "You were saying?" he taunted, swinging his new weapon back and forth like a baseball bat. Blood spattered everywhere, bits of torn flesh bobbing back and forth with the motion. Moses flexed his claws and stalked forward with purpose, heart pounding and eyes on fire. Silky peered at the hand beneath the wrist he'd been using as a handle and inspected the tight fist of the punch that had never landed. He glanced at Moses, who was shaking as he slowly moved across the dance floor. "Nah, yous look like a bitch," he teased, and peeled open the fingers of the dead hand. "So you's gonna get slapped like a bitch." Moses lunged forward, claws extended, but Silky easily unleashed a hellish volley of slaps from a comfortable distance. Like a farmhand whipping a rented mule, he rained down a savage beating until the demon was cowering on the floor. "Please, no more!" Moses cried, and Silky actually paused, staring down at him with disgust. "For shit's sake, you can't even take your whooping like a man?" he asked, ignoring Rose's humph of disapproval from the doorway. The frat demon didn't move from the floor, still covering himself as best he could with his arms, and the pimp sighed in exasperation. He tossed the arm behind him like a crumpled-up piece of trash and turned away from the shivering demon. He opened his hands to Rose in a shrug, giving her a friendly smile, and she rolled her eyes. She reached up and wrenched the 9-iron free from the wall, tossing it to him like a good little caddy. Moses let out a battle cry, and Silky turned on his heel, bringing the club up instinctively. Steel hit steel as the demon tried to come down with a pipe, but the pimp easily spun his body down the frat pug's arms to flank him. Moses tried to turn, but he wasn't fast enough for Silky, who landed a crushing blow right on top of his head. The mouthiest and final frat boy fell to the dance floor with a wet slap. Silky stood tall, his club upright in front of him in a regal pose. He didn't move at all, and Rose raised her eyebrows at him expectantly. "Give it a rest already," she urged, motioning to him. "Wait for it," he replied, and she crossed her arms, wondering what in blazes he was talking about. "Wait for what?" "Shh, wait for it," he repeated, and she looked around the room exasperated and confused. The front door burst open and a short guy bustled in, dragging a comically large fan behind him. "Sorry, boss," he said in a thick Spanish accent, kicking aside demon bits to position the fan just right. He brushed a stray hunk of skin from the nearby outlet to insert the plug, and the fan whirred to life. The breeze caught Silky's jacket and blew it gently. "Oh yeah, that's what Silky's talking about." He leaned his head back, closing his eyes momentarily. Decadent skin taut over his high cheekbones. His heart-shaped chin sported an impeccably trimmed goatee, soft, full lips curling into a cat-like grin. "Who the fuck is this?" Rose blurted, motioning to the random Spanish guy she'd never seen before. Silky ignored her, spreading his legs into a power stance, shiny white penny loafers almost blinding and impossibly clean despite the carnage around them. His strong, massive hands clasped each other on the handle of the 9-iron, fingers adorned with shiny baubles that glinted in the soft lights. He was a statue of epic pimp and circumstance in a sea of devastation, with a firm brow that took no shit and gave no fucks. "Okay, Enrique, that's enough." Silky finally broke his pose to wave at the fan bearer. "Muy bueno. Silky's dismissing you." He reached into his coat and held out a 20 to the short man. "Thank you, Mr. Silky, thank you." Enrique praised thickly, and then unplugged the fan, dragging it back out the door. Rose stared down at the smear of demon blood left behind and then raised her eyes back to the smug pimp before her. "You hired a little Mexican dude to make you look cool?" She raised a hand to her forehead, but in the grand scheme of things, she didn't know why she was surprised. "Hey now, Silky don't need nobody to make him look cool," he chastised with a click of his tongue. "Silky's just trying to help a brother out. He's too young to be pimping, you know." "So you pay him to follow you around with a fan," Rose stated, voice almost tired. She knew asking him anything more would just raise more questions, and she didn't have the energy for that. "It's a hero pose, baby. Every great hero's gotta have one." Silky grinned at her, and she shook her head. "Unfucking believable," she muttered. Chapter 3. Rose strode over to where Moses was softly groaning on the floor. His head was mostly caved in, but demons had stamina, and he was still coherent enough to talk to her. She towed him onto his back, flopping him easily, and then pressed her boot into his crotch and leaned. A choked sob clawed its way out of his throat, and she glared down at him. "What are you doing this far out of town?" she demanded. "I didn't think you demon frat boys left the college area. Not enough stupid drunk sorority girls around this week?"
"Actually, there aren't," Moses groaned.
Rose snarled and backhanded him, sick of these chauvinist frat dicks thinking they were God's gift to women. "Damn, baby, nice technique," Silky complimented her. "Thanks." She continued to beat Moses's face in, letting out her frustrations with him and his pack of douchebags harassing her. While she was at that, Silky headed around to the rest of the bodies, using his ceremonial blade to dispatch the demons for good. Soon the dance floor was sticky with melted demonic goo. Rose plunked down onto Moses's chest hard, straddling his shoulders so she could press his cheek down into the pungent muck that was all that was left of his friends. "You see that?" she cooed. "That's going to be you in just a minute." He simply whimpered at her words, trying to close his eyes against the carnage. "Now, you're going to tell me what you're doing this far away from home," she demanded.
"There weren't enough stupid drunk sorority girls around this week,"
Moses cried, an edge of hysterical sarcasm to his gravelly voice. She hauled off and punched him with 3 quick jabs to the throat.
"Stop that!"
He gasped for air, croaking the words through a crushed larynx. "Tell me what I want to know," she said, voice cold as ice, "and I'll make it go quickly."
"How many times do I have to tell you?"
he cried hoarsely.
"The sorority girls are all at Palm Meadows Resort. It's spring break, you dumb bitch!"
Rose scowled at him and reached into her boot for her own ceremonial knife. She paused, then decided to punch him a few more times. She stood before plunging the knife into his chest to avoid getting melty demon goo all over her dress. What a messy fucking night. "Goddamn demon frat boy fucks," Rose muttered as she wiped off her ceremonial knife to return it to her boot. "Christ, I need a fucking shower." "Settle down there, sister girl," Silky said with a wink, and waved for her to follow him over to the bar. "We's got some work to do first. Where's your shit at?" She reached into her left boot on the other thigh, opposite the knife holster and produced her phone. Ooh-wee, what else you got in them boots? Silky waggled his eyebrows as they took a seat at the bar. She busied herself with unlocking her phone, not wanting to admit that she had rigged up the thigh highs because she couldn't find her matching purse for this outfit. The smooth pimp set his trusty golf club down on the floor and leaned forward, peering down to see the cowering middle-aged bartender still in the fetal position on the floor. Yo, Cracker, can we get some motherfucking service up in here? Silky asked, and the bartender had to take a second to marvel at how jovial and compliant the man's tone was, even when barking orders.
What were those guys?
He stammered, peeling his fingers out of their white-knuckled fist. He hadn't seen much, but what he had seen had been complete insanity. And what he had heard, those honkies were part of a demon cult, bent on destroying the world, you dig? Silky waved his hand with a flourish, motioning to the entire world revolving around him.
The frat boys?
The bartender asked incredulously, slowly moving up into a sitting position. His eyes were massive and confused as he gazed up at the couple above him. He should have known as soon as a woman that hot wandered in that it was going to mean epic trouble.
You's goddamn right, the frat dicks. Shit.
Silky leaned on one arm, lowering that shoulder to shoot the man on the floor a conspiratorial look.
Frat boys are bad enough, but these needle dicks will do more than fuck your daughter in the ass. They's gonna take her soul, too.
But...
The bartender let out a ragged breath, mind swirling with the information.
I don't have a daughter,
he stammered.
It's a metaphor, you ignorant cracker.
Silky rolled his eyes.
Now you gonna give us some fucking service, or does Silky gotta come back there and do this shit?
The bartender snapped out of his haze of fear, remembering that he was first and foremost the owner of this fine establishment, and serving these people that kept him from becoming demon chow might be in his best interest. It would also be a good distraction from the cold panic threatening to blow his sanity open over having almost just died at the hands of demonic university students. He straightened up, smoothed his hair back, and pulled on his customer service face like a mask. He got to his feet and desperately tried to ignore the carnage of demon goo splattered all over his bar. He wondered how much a cleaning service would charge to deal with this, because he wasn't sure that his mop bucket would be able to handle this. Not now, not now. Customer service.
Apologies,
he said with a slight bow of his head, setting his hands flat on the counter to address his customers directly.
What can I get for you, sir?
Gin and juice, motherfucker. What else you think Silky's gonna drink?
The pimp flashed him a wide smile and then wagged a warning finger at him.
And don't you go skimping on the gin either.
Coming right up.
The bartender nodded and glanced at Rose, who was pumping away on her phone's touchscreen.
Scotch for the lady?
She nodded her head absently in approval, and he turned to make their drinks, forcing his hands to stay steady. The drink he'd made prior to the pink demons busting back inside had been knocked to the other end of the bar, half of it sloshed all over the wood.
What you got, girl?
Silky peered over Rose's shoulder to see there was a video call waiting to go through.
Just getting set up with the agency.
She propped the phone up on its case so they were facing it, and nodded her thanks to the bartender as he slid a glass to her.
Should be up in just a moment.
Silky took a sip of his drink, and as soon as the ambrosia hit his tongue, elation washed over him. He pointed at the bartender with an appreciative smile.
God damn, that's my boy. Woo-ha!
Good evening, Silky. A professional voice emanated from the phone, and the pimp turned his grin on the screen. Chapter 4.
Boss man.
Silky raised his glass in a toast to the white-collared man in the frame.
How did the sting operation go?
The boss asked, straight down to business. His salt and pepper hair was slicked back as always, beard perfectly manscaped on his hard-edged face.
The operation was a success, sir. We got their destination,
Rose replied, straightening up as she spoke to her higher-up.
Palm Meadows Resort. It looks like it's down by the coast.
Palm Meadows? The boss furrowed his brow and glanced away from the camera, likely looking up the place as Rose had before calling. This isn't good.
What's going on, boss man?
Silky prompted, taking another swig of his delectable drink. Are either of you familiar with the princess? The boss asked, finally turning his gaze back to them.
Ain't that the tall, skinny bitch demon?
The pimp countered, lips twisting up in thought. She's not just a tall, skinny bitch, Silky, the boss replied, and the bartender blinked at the phone. He couldn't help but eavesdrop, and hearing the word skinny bitch coming out of this professional-looking guy's mouth was surreal. But what came next made him almost drop the glass he was polishing. She also has an enchanted rack.
Enchanted rack?
Rose blurted in exasperation.
You've got to be fucking kidding me.
I couldn't be more serious, Rose, the boss said in a no-nonsense tone. In most cases, diamonds are a girl's best friend, but in her case, it's those magnificent tits. Rose shot back the rest of her scotch and shoved the empty glass back at the bartender. He scrabbled for it, not wanting to look like he was listening intently to their conversation. But why would they be having it so openly in front of him if it wasn't okay for him to hear it? He had a sudden vision of being on the smooshing end of Silky's golf club and swallowed hard. No, if he'd heard or seen too much, they'd have killed him already, right? They wouldn't be keeping him around just to make drinks. These people seemed reasonable. They only killed demons, right? The bartender fought to keep from shaking scotch all over the counter as he gave himself his mental pep talk. Several years ago, the boss began, his voice a lilting cadence comparable to a news reporter. She sold her soul in order to win a beauty pageant. And if the swimsuit contest had been last, she would have won. She had the judges eating out of the palm of her hand with those hypnotic hooters. There was a slight shift to his shoulders, and Rose imagined that out of frame he was holding an imaginary pair of tits on his chest for effect. Such professionalism. Unfortunately for her, the evening gown she had chosen for the last phase of the contest covered up just a little too much cleavage. They lost their power, and she ended up tripping on the dress in her frustration and falling off of the stage. Before she could try to hypnotize the judges and the crowd again, she'd already lost the contest. After that, she set off across the East Coast, leaving a trail of very happy-looking corpses. The boss finished and looked down out of frame again. A text rolled down from the top of Rose's screen, and she brought it up, revealing the boss's picture message of a few crime scene photos. They all revealed very dead men, pelvises crushed to smithereens as if they'd been literally fucked to death. Each had a glassy-eyed, lifeless stare, but their mouths were curled up into the creepiest of happy smiles. Rigor mortis had locked their arms in their final resting position, straight out to the front, with the hands in a clear, groping position.
Poor crackers,
Silky said with a sigh, shaking his head as Rose flipped back to the video feed.
So what does this mean to Silky?
According to our intel, she was last spotted heading towards the Palm Meadows Resort, the boss said. I need you both to get down there as quickly as possible and find out what's going on.
Silky's calling the hoes right now.
The pimp pulled his phone out of his inner jacket pocket and waved it as he spoke.
We's be down there by morning.
Rose, I'm sending you the info on a safe house that you'll be staying at. The boss met her eyes as she lifted her fresh glass of scotch to her lips. It's in a semi-nice neighborhood, so do try to take care of it.
Silky don't make no promises.
Silky piped up as he dialed a phone number, leaning back against the bar casually. He was the pinnacle of relaxation, and Rose entertained the idea for a split second of kicking the bar stool out from under him. I understand, the boss nodded, killing the moment for her. Silky did as Silky did, and she didn't have to work with him if she didn't want to. Regardless of his over-the-top ways, she did enjoy his company. He definitely kept things interesting. Oh, and one more thing, the boss added. I'm sending out a new recruit. His name is Kerr. Silky, I need you to break him in."
"Oh," Rose replied with a chuckle. "Don't worry. He'll break him in all right."
"I'm sure he will," the boss said with a firm nod. "Report back to me when you have more intel."
"Will do, boss man."
Silky waved and then started yammering into his phone at one of his holes. Rose gave the boss a salute and ended the call, slipping her phone back against her thigh. She stood up, shooting the last of her drink, and pulled out the bills she'd scooped from Moses earlier in the night. She tossed them on the counter as Silky finished his call, following her lead and getting up from the bar stool.
"Thanks, barkeep,"
Silky said with his signature grin, and offered Rose his fuzzy arm to escort her to the door. Using his golf club as a cane, he swaggered them to the front door as the bartender looked on in bewilderment. When they reached the door, Silky opened it and gave Rose an exaggerated bow. She chuckled and gave a fake curtsy, rolling her eyes out of habit, but secretly finding the gentlemanly gesture endearing.
"Who are you?"
the bartender called just before they stepped out into the night. Silky reached into his coat, revealing a pair of massive sunglasses with sparkly bling all along the rims.
"Smooth and silky,"
he purred, sliding the glasses onto his face with unimaginable grace.
"Demon Fighting Pimp."
Chapter 5.
"What the shit is this?"
Silky spat as he turned his metallic purple Eldorado into what could only be described as suburbia hell.
"Silky ain't staying at a place like this."
The sun was shining happily as if they hadn't been covering a bar in demon goo the night before. Every house looked cheerful, bright, and exactly the same. Rack 'em, stack 'em, and pack 'em.
"Come on, it's not that bad,"
Rose replied, motioning for him to pull over in front of a modest house.
"At least there's no white picket fence." "You ain't helping any,"
he muttered as he accelerated up the driveway, pulling up the parking brake with more force than necessary.
"Sides, Silky thought we supposed to be at the coast. Silky don't see no fucking beach." "Of course, the agency is skimping on resources."
She shrugged as she exited the car, her long legs bare in the tropical heat. She'd opted for a simple sundress and flip-flops that day, not wanting to draw any attention with full-on agency garb. Though Silky drew attention wherever he went, especially with that car, but there was no toning down Silky, and she did feel nice and cozy in the lavender shag interior. It was definitely built for comfort.
"We're about a mile inland,"
she told him, retrieving her backpack from the floor and slinging it over her shoulder.
"You're not really dressed for the beach anyway. Silky's dressed for every occasion, baby."
He flipped open his powder blue coat and put a hand on his hip as he exited the car, taking a beat to pose with his trusty club. When he decided that the proper amount of time had lapsed for Rose to admire his majestic getup, he relaxed and took in the front of the house again.
"Goddamn cheap-ass honkies,"
he sneered, and she turned away from him, stomping up the front walk.
"Oh, quit your bitching," she retorted. "You never know. It could be nice inside."
She opened the door and appraised the shiny hardwood floor. She strutted into the living room and ran a hand along the cream-colored couch, admiring the simple decor and minimalist furniture. It was contemporary, like something out of an IKEA catalog, but not unpleasant.
"Oh, hell no,"
Silky drawled as soon as he stepped over the threshold, waving a hand in the air like a lunatic.
"Silky ain't living with this shit." "What?"
Rose crossed her arms as he turned right back around and went back through the door.
"Wait! Where are you going?"
She ran to the doorframe and peered out at him, noting that he wasn't getting back in the driver's seat to leave. He strutted up to the trunk and opened it, inclining a little bow of his head.
"You hoes ready to do some work for old Silky?"
he asked, stepping back, and Rose's eyes near popped out of her head as he helped a blonde woman step out of the back of the Eldorado.
What do you need, baby?
The woman asked, straightening her black miniskirt and adjusting the red and white polka dot halter top that just barely reached the underside of her breast.
Silky wants you hoes to clean this place up.
He motioned to the house and then extended his hand to help a second woman step out. She had chocolate brown hair and high pigtails and wore a bright pink baby doll dress over bubblegum heels.
What is this? Felix's magic hoe bag?
Rose muttered as she saw a third woman spring onto the sidewalk. This one had hair as black as ebony and was clad in denim Daisy Dukes with a blue and white plaid bikini top that just barely covered nipple. Rose felt like she was looking at Charlie's sluts, and she crossed her arms at the fact that the pimp kept one of each hair color in his trunk at all times. Of course, there was no redhead, and she narrowed her eyes at the thought that she was the redhead. A perfect set.
Pimpified, babes.
Silky spread his arms, leaning back and wildly waving the golf club at the house. As the women hopped too, he slapped the one with the short shorts on her toned ass as she squeaked out a giggle.
Oh yeah, that's right.
He appraised the reverberation of her globes under his hand. Rose jumped out of the way of the three hoes bustling through the door, a flurry of tanned skin and impossibly high heels.
What the fuck is this?
She demanded, stomping back down the walkway towards her partner.
You had holes in the fucking trunk this whole time?
Settle down, baby. He held up a hand to stop her.
Silky's gotta have his hoes on the road with him. Gotta keep the income flowing. And these ain't just run-of-the-mill hoes. Trixie, Mixie, and Dixie are Silky's prize bitches.
Unbelievable. Rose pinched the bridge of her nose.
Hey, don't get too mad at old Silky now.
He reached into the blankets the women had been laying on and rummaged around.
I gave them some toys for the trip. They was entertained.
He produced a neon pink vibrator and Rose scoffed, slapping it out of his hand.
Really?
She slammed the trunk shut, nearly severing his hand, and he shot her a 1,000-watt grin.
Them hoes is making themselves useful,
he said as the sunlight glinted off his golden grill and started back up towards the house.
Right now, they's fixing up the place for old Silky here.
When they entered the living room again, Rose stopped dead. There were leopard print covers on the couches, lava lamps lighting the dim space with the curtains drawn, and a massive painting of a pimp in black velvet hanging over the fireplace.
Where? How?
Rose stammered, and then shook her head. They must have had this stuff stashed in the house somewhere, or they'd gone back out to the trunk. The more she thought about it, the more her head started to hurt.
Now, this is what Silky's talking about.
He gave a little wiggle of his hips in excitement.
These hoes work fast, I'll give them that,
Rose said, putting a hand to her forehead.
Silky's got 'em trained right,
he said, licking his lips at the three women on the couch. They were celebrating their quick and efficient job with some very close cuddling.
The slower they work, the less money Silky gets.
I'm going to get things set up in the office. Rose turned away from the tangle of limbs and lips in the pimpin' living room.
I'll call for you when I'm up and running.
The blonde hoe extended her arm and curled her finger up in a come-hither motion.
You do that,
Silky says, a spring in his step as he jaunts into the living room.
Silky can find something to occupy himself in the meantime.
Chapter 6. The humidity was soul-crushing that day, especially for someone not used to it. The confident young man that strutted up the sidewalk in East Coast suburbia felt like he was breathing soup. He hoped the house had air conditioning. He stopped short at the Pimp mobile in the driveway and had to double-check his phone to make sure he had the right house. The car was the most conspicuous thing he'd ever seen. He stepped up onto the porch and set his suitcase to the side, straightening his shirt. He rapped on the door firmly, straightening his spine. This was the first day of field work, and he wanted to make a good impression. Nobody answered, and he knocked again. leaning to the side to peer in the window. There was a creak as the door opened. "Hey, I'm Kerr. I was sent," he began, and then his jaw hit the floor when he turned to face a scantily clad blonde bombshell. "Here by the... Wow." "Yeah, I get that a lot," the woman giggled, shifting her weight so that her perfectly curvy hip jutted out enough for her to rest a soft hand on it. "I can imagine," Kerr said, composing himself. He tried desperately not to look her up and down, but her tits were magnetic and practically bursting out of her tiny red halter. "A woman as beautiful as you, I'm sure that you have guys lined up around the block to be with you." The words tumbled out of his mouth as he quickly raised his eyes to her face. He had to be professional. This couldn't be an agent for sure, with her plump painted lips and colorful eyeshadow. He swallowed hard, forcing down the awkwardness at being so attracted to her. "I did that once, but it hurt a lot," she said, putting a finger to her chin in thought. "I think you can still order that movie, though, if you can find the right website." Kerr blinked at her. An image flitted through his head of this sultry siren being plowed by a bunch of guys at once, and then physically shook himself back to reality. Professional. "Oh," he stammered. "You don't say." "Yeah, that was my biggest seller," she said, poofy curls bobbing on top of her head as she nodded enthusiastically. "Or wait, was it the one I did with Big Jim and Truck Turner?" "Okay, moving on," Kerr said, trying to steer the conversation in a less porn-related direction. "The agency sent me. I'm supposed to meet with a Smoothen Silky?" The woman looked him up and down, appraising him a little more in depth after hearing where he was from. He was dressed business casual, beige slacks and a white button-down shirt. Suddenly, a soft-looking pastel blue sleeve snaked around her and pushed her behind the door. Kerr blinked a few times at the tall guy that looked like he'd just walked out of a pimp convention. But there couldn't possibly be anyone else more deserving of a name like Smoothen Silky. "You must be," he started, but the pimp stood in the doorway defiantly and cut him off. $20, Silky yelled, squaring his shoulders. "Excuse me?" Kerr stood up to his full height as well, though he was more than a little intimidated. He was just over 6 feet tall and not used to having to look up at anyone. But this guy was a beast. He had to be at least half a foot taller than the new field agent. "Silky said $20. The pimp tore his ridiculously huge sunglasses from his face, the glittering of gems on the sides nearly blinding. You need to borrow $20? The recruit scratched the back of his head nervously. His face suddenly stung like a bitch, and it took him a few seconds to realize that the pimp had backhanded him clean across the face. "Motherfucking dumbass honky!" Silky leaned down so that his nose was a hair's breadth away from the guy on the doorstep. "You owe Silky $20. "Owe him? You... $20? Kerr stammered, a flush creeping up his face from the slap. It was more humiliation than pain, and he wasn't sure if he was as excited for this job as he'd initially been. "For what?" "You've been taking up this hoe's time," Silky said, his voice menacing, but somehow still smooth as chocolate. "What? Her?" The recruit motioned to the woman who was now peeking out from the living room along with 2 other sets of eyes. "She just answered the door." "And you took up her fucking time," Silky replied, at this point exasperated that this moron wasn't getting it. "Her time is worth $20. "But Silky knows you don't want to be taking food out of Silky's mouth now, do you?" His voice lowered an octave, and Kerr swallowed hard. "No," he replied thickly. "No, sir." "Now look." The pimp suddenly leaned back against the doorframe casually, checking his perfect nails as if he hadn't just been threatening as all hell. "Silky ain't one to judge what another man is into. Some want to tap that ass,
Some wanna yodel in the fucking valley, and some just wanna chit-chat. Silky's down with it. He's cool as a fucking cucumber. He slid his hand through the air to indicate how level he really was about the whole thing, and Kerr found himself nodding, even though he was still a bit lost. Now, do you know what these three got in common? Silky raised an eyebrow, pulling his sunglasses a little ways down to his nose. The recruit swallowed again. No, sir. The pimp grinned. They all paid Silky $20. At the sight of the golden teeth spelling Silky, Kerr blinked a few times and realized that he wasn't going to win this one. Okay. He sighed and reached into his pocket, pulling out his wallet. He held out a $20 bill, and Silky snatched it out of his hand, running it under his nose like a cigar. Silky appreciates your fucking business. He bowed his head slightly, and then slammed the door. What the fuck just happened? Kerr muttered to himself, momentarily stunned by the interaction. If this was par for the course field work, his job was about to get a hell of a lot more interesting. He knocked on the door again, squaring his shoulders to try to show he wasn't intimidated. Silky threw open the door. What do you want, cracker? You got another 20? No, Mr. Silky, sir. Kerr innately winced at how awkward he sounded, but shoved away his embarrassment. I was sent by the agency. I'm Kerr, your new recruit. He raised his chin and Silky pulled his sunglasses clean off his face. They sent Silky, your dumb, blondie, blue-eyed country bumpkin ass? His tone dripped with incredulity, eyes condescending. God damn. Silky's getting too old for this shit. He sighed at the determined gaze on Kerr's face. All right, grab your shit and come on. The recruit let out a breath of relief and grasped his suitcase quickly, rolling it behind him as he followed the baby blue-clad pimp inside. Chapter 7. Kerr's eyes darted all over the living room, noting the decor that was vastly different from every other room of the house. He set his suitcase next to the couch, trying to ignore the two women snuggling up to the woman who'd answered the door. They seemed very friendly. What the fuck you think you's doing, cracker? Silky snapped. Kerr said, and took a deep breath. He really needed to work on not sounding like an idiot every time his superior asked him a question. Just putting my stuff down? Ah, Silky gets it. The pimp replaced his sunglasses onto the bridge of his nose despite the dimness of the room, and cocked his head. You think you's just gonna come up in a brother's house and throw your shit down? That it, honky? No, sir. I'm sorry, Just what? Silky barked. Just what, cracker? I'm sorry. Kerr shrugged and grasped his suitcase so that it was clean off the floor, not even on its wheels anymore. You sorry? Silky cupped a hand around his ear and waited. That all you got to say for yourself? He snatched up a golf club that had been leaning up against the wall, and Kerr took an involuntary step back. Honky, you best keep your shit up off the floor before Silky shoves these loafers so far up your ass, you's gonna be spitting pennies. Spitting pennies? Kerr blurted in his nervousness, and Silky scoffed, lashing out to slap him in the back of the head. They's penny loafers, motherfucker! He lifted his foot and rested it on the edge of Kerr's suitcase to show him the shiny white shoes. Silky gonna have to teach your inbred ass everything. God damn! He sighed and lowered his foot, the heel hitting the carpet with a soft thud. He waved for the recruit to follow him, wandering through the doorway at the back of the living room towards the basement. What's down there? Kerr asked as Silky opened the door, motioning towards the stairs that headed down into darkness. That's where you stand, the pimp replied. Down there? A burst of anger flared up in Kerr's chest as the stress and humiliation bubble burst. Down there, Silky smiled. But that's the basement, the recruit snapped. Hooey, you's an observant motherfucker, ain't you? Silky leaned on the door and crossed his feet at the ankles. Years of agency training. What can I say?
Kerr retorted before he even thought about it, a smart-ass tone shining through his exasperation.
"Get your cracker ass down there before Silky whoops it,"
Silky threatened in a menacing tone. The recruit clenched his jaw and stepped down onto the wooden staircase, the door slamming into his back before he was fully inside. He stumbled down a few steps, pain exploding in his forehead as he bonked his head against the low ceiling. He mumbled a few curses under his breath and ducked down into the area that looked like it was more for storage than a real basement. There were boxes piled from floor to ceiling and a tattered reclining lawn chair that looked like it had seen better days. Kerr dropped his suitcase on the concrete floor and collapsed into the chair. He leaned back and settled in, staring at the wooden beams overhead. There was a creak and groan, and the chair collapsed, pain reverberating up his spine like lightning as his tailbone hit the cement floor. He rolled onto his side, throwing an arm over his eyes as he hissed in pain. This was going to be a long assignment. Chapter 8. Kerr finished placing his things on the makeshift shelf he'd created out of the boxes, and then sat back on the decently comfortable bed he'd managed to make up. A few of the bigger boxes had been full of comforters, so he'd crafted a pallet out of cardboard and layered blankets on top. He stretched out on his homemade cot and pulled out his phone, scrolling aimlessly through his Twitter feed before his stomach growled loudly. It was getting to be around dinner time. Why was he hanging out in the basement anyway? Silky had sent him down there, but was he really just going to stay down here until he was called, like a dog? Kerr stood up and stretched his arms up over his head, relishing the sweet crackle of his back and shoulders as he did so. Enough was enough. Smoothen Silky was his superior, but Kerr had done his time at the agency. He would prove himself or die trying. He opened the basement door with authority and then strolled through the kitchen into the living room with as much confidence as he could muster. He'd never had a problem with the other recruits. He needed to stay in that mindset here. "There you is. Let's get this shit started." Silky waved him over from his perch on the couch, surrounded by his women. The two on either side snuggled up to him like a silky sandwich, and the third straddled his back, hands working at his bare shoulders. The pristine powder blue coat hung artfully on a coat rack behind them, an imposing presence all on its own. Kerr stopped short, bravado forgotten when he realized he'd been fucking around in the basement when he was supposed to be in a strategy meeting. "Sorry, I wasn't aware that's your problem, Wonder Bread. You wouldn't be aware of shit on a sandwich." Silky tilted his head down, eyeing the recruit from over the top of his sunglasses. Kerr squared his shoulders again, determined to keep his cool. Mere minutes after vowing to do better, he was already being insulted. But instead of arguing, he needed to just face this head on. Grunts always got the abuse, right? He had to just take it in stride, and eventually he'd get to be the one knocking around new recruits. He turned to the opposite couch to sit, and his breath caught in his throat at the woman sitting there with her laptop. She hadn't been around with the other three earlier, fawning all over Silky. In fact, she didn't look like she belonged to the pimp room at all. Thick red curls draped over creamy shoulders, a pale yellow sundress hugging a shapely body, mile-long legs stretched out, ending at bare feet that braced themselves on the coffee table. Kerr blinked a few times and gulped as he sank down into the couch, and she immediately turned her bright green eyes on him. It was as if he'd been stabbed in the gut by her glare, and her deliciously full lips pursed as she exaggerated, looking down at his thigh, pressed up against hers. He coughed nervously, not having meant to plop down right against her, and backed up so that he was at the opposite end of the couch. He caught a faint whiff of lavender as he slid away from her and resisted the urge to lean forward and bury his nose in her hair. So professional, he mentally chastised himself and forced his gaze to Silky. who had gotten up to pace.
All right, so we's got a job to do down here,
the pimp began as he strutted back and forth along the crimson shag carpet.
And you know what? We's gonna get it done hella quick so Silky can go soak up some of them rays and pick up a hoe or two. Or three.
The women on the couch giggled, stroking each other with seemingly practiced sensuality. Kerr forced his eyeballs to stay glued to his superior, ignoring the ridiculous amount of sex appeal oozing all over the room.
So what's the plan?
He asked, proud of how firm his voice sounded.
The plan is for you to shut the fuck up and let Silky talk, Sugar Cube,
came the sharp retort, and Kerr sat back against the plush couch cushion. He resisted the urge to mime zipping his mouth shut and continued to stare at the pacing pimp.
Rose, what you got for old Silky?
He pointed at the luscious redhead with the laptop.
Well, I've pulled up rental records for the houses in this area,
she said, and Kerr wanted to slam his head against the wall at the husky tone of her voice. How did anyone work in these conditions? It wasn't fucking fair.
There are half a dozen fraternities that have rented houses, and that's just the ones that we know of.
Right. Silky wound his fingers in a circle to encourage her to go on.
We'll have a couple of the ladies go out on the town trying to get an invite to one of the parties,
Rose added, motioning to the three scantily clad ladies on the couch.
Who's our objective?
Kerr spoke up, injecting himself into the strategy meeting with an air of authority.
Look at that. The slack-jawed yokel finally asked a relevant question.
Sarcasm poured from Silky's voice like a waterfall, but Kerr decided to take it as a compliment, however backhanded it was.
Our target is this woman.
Rose turned her laptop to reveal a photo of a bleach blonde beach babe in a tiny bikini and a pageant sash.
She's a nasty demon, and we're trying to figure out why she's here for spring break.
Why frat parties? Kerr asked with a shrug.
I mean, a woman that hot should be pretty easy to spot. Why not just drive around and look for her? It's more complicated than just following your dick.
Rose closed the laptop and leaned forward to set it on the coffee table.
The fraternities that we track down all have demon possession affiliation. For the most part, they use the fraternity as a front to harvest souls.
Kerr was impressed with the woman's articulate nature and felt a little badly for sexualizing her so hard when he first saw her. She seemed to be the most professional person in the room.
With that tall, skinny bitch in the mix, we's pretty sure something big and fucking bad's going down here.
Silky emphasized his words with swoops of a 9-iron. Kerr eyed it, but was too afraid to ask.
So, when do we leave?
He inquired instead, itching to get out there and show off his skills.
Whoa there, cracker. You's thinking you's ready for the field?
Silky stopped and put his hand up, palm out.
Damn straight.
Kerr quenched his nervousness and stood up. It was now or never. He had come here to show the agency what he was made of, and if he had to stand up to a pimp and his hoes to do it, then that's what he was going to do.
I graduated top of my class at the agency, blowing away the competition. Besides, they sent me to you, didn't they?
He motioned to Silky with a conspiratorial grin.
Surely they're going to send the best recruit to the best field agent, aren't they?
Oh, you's a savvy motherfucker, ain't you? Silky threw his head back and barked a laugh at the flattery.
Okay, Silky's gonna give you a shot. You just go on back down to your hole and old Silky will let you know when it's time to get out of here.
Kerr mentally high-fived himself, totally surprised that the pimp seemed impressed by him.
Really?
He caught his childish, hopeful tone and coughed to try to cover it up.
Yeah, all right. Go on now, buddy. Silky's gonna talk to Rose here and get your plans all set up nice,
his superior said, shooing him off like a cat.
All right, Mr. Silky.
Kerr couldn't quash his excitement this time. A real field mission. This was it. He was doing it.
I won't let you down,
he added, and scurried off back into the kitchen, grabbing a box of crackers on the way by the counter.
Silky, sure you won't.
the pimp called after him, and when the basement door closed, he turned to share a conspiratorial smile with Rose.
That cracker don't know what he's in for.
Chapter 9. Silky descended the wooden steps into the basement, nose twitching at the smell of dank cardboard. At the bottom, his mauve hat grazing the low ceiling, he turned to see Kerr dancing off to the side. No, not dancing. Shadowboxing, it looked like. Some kind of kung fu shit, that was for sure. "What you doing down here?" Silky asked, and Kerr didn't respond. He was about to make a comment about how it was rude for a hoe not to answer a question when she was asked, but then he realized the kid was wearing earbuds. He extended his trusty golf club and poked the recruit in the back, eliciting a yelp as Kerr leapt into the air, bonking the top of his head into a wooden beam.
Ah, shit!
Kerr yanked the earbuds out, thrash metal blasting out of the little nubs.
"Sorry, sir. What's up? Did you say something?"
Silky asked, "What the fuck you doing?" his superior asked, motioning to the earbuds and his shirtless and sweat-sheen torso.
"Oh, just doing some training before my first mission,"
Kerr explained, excited to get to share some personal details with him.
"See, it's a way for me to relax, and the music—"
"Silky didn't ask for your goddamn life story, honky." The pimp held up a hand to stop him from rambling on.
"Sorry,"
Kerr replied immediately, keeping his posture formal. He was vaguely aware that he probably smelled pretty bad and needed to get upstairs to shower before any of the ladies got too close to him. He was amazed at how put together and shiny the pimp was, having changed into a dusty, deep purple suit and jacket. The feather proudly spewing from the top of his massive hat brushed against the wooden beams of the ceiling, and the recruit couldn't help but feel a bit mesmerized by it.
"And quit apologizing so damn much,"
Silky continued, tapping the golf club on the kid's head with a hollow pock.
"Man, you's worse than a hoe. Where's that cracker I saw upstairs, huh? Silky needs a honky that believes in himself."
"All right." Kerr blinked at him, amazed that he'd just gotten a pep talk from the guy that had spent most of the day insulting him.
"No more apologies. What's the mission?"
"That's more like it, motherfucker." Silky slapped the kid on the back.
"One of Silky's hoes got picked up by a couple of those frat boy fucks, and they invited her to a party. She's supposed to be bringing a friend so's they can do a little striptease thing." "And where do I fit in?"
Kerr asked, turning off the music still blasting from the tiny speakers.
"Silky don't like to send his hoes out without protection, you dig? Usually they be getting a taser and a set of ball clamps. But seeing as how you want a shot and all, Silky's gonna send you instead." "I get to be a bouncer?"
The kid beamed, puffing out his chest.
"Fuck yeah, I can be a bouncer. I look great in a muscle shirt. The ladies will go crazy for these guns."
He flexed his biceps with a sly grin.
Whoa. Settle down there, baby boy."
Silky stifled a laugh at the recruit's train of thought.
"You ain't gonna be dressing like that." "Why not?"
Kerr lowered his arms in disappointment.
"'Cause if you do, they's gonna know that you a bouncer."
The pimp raised his eyebrows, not sure how this green-as-hell agent wasn't understanding.
"Well, yeah, and I'll intimidate them."
Kerr flexed his biceps again. At that, Silky threw his head back, gold glinting as he bellowed a laugh.
"Boy, you couldn't intimidate a one-legged crack whore with that apple pie fucking face of yours,"
he said with an amused grin that refused to go away.
"So what am I going to do?"
Kerr scowled.
"Be one of the strippers?"
"Cracker, this is an undercover mission." Silky threw up a hand in exasperation.
"We's trying to get information, not collect money from these fools. You's gonna have to blend in."
He reached into his coat and pulled out a very specific article of clothing.
"Oh, hell no,"
the recruit protested, shaking his head.
"You can't expect me to—" "No, you's wanted field work. Oh, Silky's got you field work. But I didn't know it involved this."
"That's what you be fucking getting for not asking," Silky replied jovially and tossed the garment at Kerr's head.
Get a fucking shower and put that shit on, 'cause you's leaving in 5 minutes.
Chapter 10.
I can't believe I'm dressed like this,
Kerr muttered, and both Rose and Silky's blonde holes stifled giggles.
Don't be so hard on yourself,
the redhead said while fighting a grin.
It looks fine, right, Trixie?
Yeah,
Trixie agreed.
It really brings out your eyes.
Kerr scowled and picked at the hem of the pink polo shirt he'd been forced into wearing.
This fucking sucks.
The roar of the waves seemed to accentuate his mood, swooshing up into the sand with more force than seemed necessary. Rose clenched her jaw, pursing her lips to keep from bursting into laughter.
Pink looks good on you,
she tried to assure him, and Trixie let slip a snicker.
I swear to God, if I could go back in time, I'd find the person that decided pink shirts were a good idea and beat the ever-living fuck out of them,
Kerr promised, and cracked his knuckles for effect.
I'm a man, damn it. The only legitimate reason for owning a pink shirt is if a red towel got thrown into the wash.
Are you done?
Rose raised an eyebrow at his outburst. It really wasn't that big of a deal, but she wasn't about to tell him that. He was acting like a hormonal teenager. Who said guys couldn't wear pink?
No, I'm not done,
he cried.
My manhood feels dirty from this. Hell, I feel like my manhood's shrunk from this. In fact, I'm going to do something about it.
He motioned to Trixie with a determined stare.
May I?
She shrugged sheepishly, putting her hands on her hips.
Okay.
Her tits looked like they were ready to burst from her low-cut shirt, and she assumed he was going to reach out and grab them. Kerr simply took a long, deep look at her cleavage. He drew in a breath, held it, and then released.
Okay,
he said, voice almost zen.
I feel better now.
Rose rolled her eyes at him, and he fought the urge to give her the finger as his phone trilled in his pocket.
This is Kerr,
he greeted without looking at the caller ID, and stood tall, flexing his biceps in Rose's direction. She wondered if he was going to start beating his chest.
$20!
It was Silky, and he yelled so loud that Kerr had to pull the phone away from his ear. Rose leaned and whispered something in Trixie's ear, and they shared a giggle.
Huh?
Kerr scowled.
For what?
You taking an extended look at those fine-ass titties, Silky drawled.
How the fuck did you see that?
Kerr slapped a hand to his forehead, eyes darting around.
I thought you were back at the office.
Silky's a high-tech pimp, he explained. We's on a mission, remember? We's gotta know what's going on at this party. You dig?
But how did you see you titty-gazing?
There was a laugh through the phone.
Silky has his hoes wired for video. Best way to get a good look at a honky's face is to put a camera at melon level. 'Cause when they look that good, you know a brother's gonna check that shit out.
Kerr glanced at the tiny brooch on Trixie's shirt that he hadn't noticed before, and then leaned over the cleft between Rose's tits.
You got a camera in there too?
He asked, and she growled. Before he could react, she smacked him 4 times in the back of the head, and he sidestepped out of her reach.
I am not one of Silky's hoes. Thank you very much, she snapped. I work for the agency.
Fair enough. Kerr put his hands up in surrender, and then remembered the phone call, returning the receiver to his face. He kept a close eye on Rose, just in case she felt like smacking the shit out of him again.
All right, time to get your game faces on, Silky advised. You's almost at the party. Yo, Silky, Kerr asked innocently.
What up, cracker?
You still charging me that $20?
Goddamn right. Silky's got motherfucking bills to pay. Kerr turned and buried his face in Trixie's ample breast, and her squeak of shock quickly turned to titters of amusement. He let out a happy moan at the soft pillows against his nose and cheeks, and then straightened up, regarding her with a warm smile.
Hell yeah, my lady.
He inclined his head in thanks.
Just wanted to make sure I got my money's worth. Remind Silky to whoop your ass later, the pimp said sharply through the cell. I'll add it to the list, Kerr replied with a jovial tone, happy to be keeping it light. Regardless of hot chicks beating him up with a pink polo shirt, he was getting paid to motorboat titties. Agency life was good. Chapter 11. Inside the palatial frat house, Rose squeezed Kerr's shoulder gently as a little show of support for his first mission. He shot her a quick smile of appreciation and turned to offer one to Trixie. There were sudden hands all over his arms, and his first reaction was to kung fu the shit out of whoever was grabbing him. But he stopped himself just in time, remembering that he was an undercover frat idiot. Woo! One of the frat boys grasping him cheered. Newcomer! The other three shoved him towards the kitchen island that was covered in various bottles of beer and liquor. Funnel! The second guy pumped his fist into the air, and Kerr raised an eyebrow as people poured into the kitchen from other rooms, chanting, Funnel! 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 Trixie put a hand to her mouth and giggled, and Rose leaned in close to her ear. Just work the room, she said, over the hooting and hollering from the kitchen. I'm going to find out what's going on after the party. I need you to try to get as many faces on camera as you can. Then Silky can run them through the demon database. Trixie nodded, but then wrinkled her nose in thought. What's a database? She cocked her head in thought. Don't worry about it, hon. Rose gave her shoulder a little pat. Just go do what you do best, and we'll handle the rest. She smiled warmly, and Trixie nodded. She flounced off into the kitchen, blonde curls bouncing behind her. The redhead turned to the living room, moving casually away from the kitchen, admiring a few of the abstract paintings along the way. It had a large sunken sitting area with built-in sofas covered in pillows and cushions. There were a few couples getting hot and heavy on various surfaces, but Rose quickly spied a nervous-looking guy sitting by himself. His posture was stiff, and he seemed like he was trying too hard to look relaxed and casual. Rose strolled up to him, put a hand delicately on her hip, and leaned a bit at the waist, motioning to the cushion beside him. Is this seat taken? She asked, voice sultry sweet. He blinked at her through his thick-rimmed glasses, and then turned his head left and right, as if checking to see whether she was actually speaking to him. No, ma'am. He had a slight southern twang that she couldn't help but find endearing. She clasped her hands in front of her, waiting expectantly. Oh, sorry, he stammered, shuffling a little to the left. Would you like to sit down? I thought you'd never ask. She replied with a smile and slid onto the cushion next to him. She turned to face him, crossing her long legs campfire style and leaning forward a bit to give him a cozy view over her cleavage. So, a flush crept up his cheeks as his gaze flickered down and then back up again. Are you having fun? He looked like he wasn't sure how to sit with her in such a friendly, relaxed pose. It's all right, I suppose, she shrugged and offered him a small smile as he drummed his fingers on his knees, struggling to find something to say. It looks like your boyfriend is having a good time, he blurted, motioning towards the kitchen where the guys were flipping Kerr over for a keg stand. Boyfriend? Him? She barked a laugh. Oh, no. She glanced back over at the green rookie, dressed in pink, desperately chugging beer upside down at a frat party. He was unknowingly doing his job well, at least. He kept the houseboys occupied so that she and Trixie could work the room. Well, he's missing out, her companion said shakily. He'd be lucky to have you. The compliment, however sweet and probably genuine for such a nerdy guy, didn't really faze her. Rose wasn't the romantic type and had a twisted feeling that his kind words were just a way to get her to take her pants off. She always had that twisted feeling, having been burned so many times in her life. Aw, thank you, sweetie.
she said with a warm smile and leaned a bit closer to him. She reached out and put a hand on his arm, and he looked down at it, gulping hard.
So, tell me.
Roy, he blurted. I'm Roy.
Roy?
Rose let the name fall from her lips as if she'd been rolling it around in her mouth first. He gulped again.
So, tell me, Roy, what is a nice guy like you doing hanging out at a party like this?
It was cliché, but she knew she didn't have to pull out the big guns on this guy. He was already putty, and all she'd done was say his name out loud.
I didn't want to be left alone in my dorm.
He shrugged.
So the guy said if I bought the beer, I could come along.
Rose opened her mouth to reply, but two frat boys strolled up looking like they were about to alpha hole all over the place.
Hey, Reggie,
one of them said.
It's Roy,
Rose piped up, and polo shirt number 1 shot her a sleazy grin.
Whatever,
he drawled, and then turned back to Roy.
We need more beer. Go get some.
He reached out and ruffled the nerd's hair.
Okay,
their target replied meekly, and Rose pursed her lips.
And you?
The sleazeball dragged his gaze up over Rose's form, leaning down to get a better look at her. She resisted the urge to punch him in the throat. Causing a scene wouldn't help her blend in any.
You should come hang in the kitchen,
he continued, and she rolled her eyes.
Not interested.
She waved him away.
Leave my friend and I alone.
Friend, huh?
The second guy laughed and smacked his buddy on the arm for emphasis.
Fucking loser got friend-zoned.
They high-fived and turned to leave, cackling all the way.
Get more beer.
The first one called back over his shoulder, and Roy stood up from the couch.
Sorry to cut our visit short, but I'd better do what they want,
he said apologetically, genuinely put out that he couldn't sit next to this bombshell anymore.
They have all my school stuff and said if I don't keep them supplied with beer, they'll toss it all in the bonfire.
And you're going to take that from them?
Rose raised an eyebrow.
Yeah,
he shrugged.
But it was really nice to meet you. The party's moving to the beach later tonight, if you want to come by.
I think I might, Roy.
She smiled up at him, and his cheeks grew pink again.
I'll see you tonight,
he trailed off, realizing that he didn't know her name, and extended his hand to her.
Rose,
she introduced herself, shaking his hand, and his blush deepened at the contact. He was so pathetically adorable that she almost wanted to knock him out and put him out of his misery.
Rose,
he stammered.
Bye, Rose. See you tonight.
He turned abruptly on his heel and scurried towards the door. Rose smoothed her jeans, straightened her tank top, and got to her feet. There wasn't anyone in her immediate vicinity to chat with, so she figured she'd take a post within saving distance of Kerr, and hopefully Trixie would be done working the room soon. She positioned herself casually against the wall, close enough to jump in for Kerr, but far enough away that those sleazebag fucks from earlier wouldn't think she wanted to hang out with them. She took a sip from her red Solo cup of water and glanced at the front door as it swung open with a whoosh. It was almost as if all of the air went out of the room. An incredibly tall, thin woman with long, thick blonde hair swept inside, face perfectly painted to emphasize her doe eyes and high cheekbones. Rose fought to keep her composure at the sight. It was the princess. Roy stepped aside to allow her to pass before he could leave and offered a smile. His gaze lowered to the epic tits near spilling out of her corset top, and it was game over. His jaw dropped open, drool visibly running out of the corner of his mouth, and his eyes went wide as saucers. She ran a long, hot pink fingernail up the curve of his throat and grasped his chin in her hands. He reluctantly allowed her to raise his face back to hers, and she leaned in so that her lips were so close he could almost feel them against his. She whispered something, and he couldn't understand what she was saying, but his body felt compelled to just go, 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 go. The princess has spoken. He walked out the door, lopsided grin on his face, massive tent in his pants, and she slammed the door behind him with a flourish. Rose cocked her head, observing the way the demon moved with cat-like grace. She wore ridiculously tall stiletto sandals and walked on them like a ballerina, gliding around the room like a specter. Rose couldn't deny that the woman was beautiful, but knowing that there was a demon in the space where a soul should be made her beauty intensely creepy. Trixie was sandwiched between two guys in polo shirts, innocently motioning to her own well-endowed, if not enchanted, tits.
Yeah, my one girlfriend says that they're too big,
she was saying,
but my other girlfriend thinks they're not big enough. What do you guys think?
Both sets of eyes were glued to her bouncing tits as she pushed them up and down for effect. Rose vaguely wondered how that looked on Silky's end through the camera. The princess strolled on past them, and like the Pied Piper, the two guys fell into step behind her. They tried to peek around her shoulders as she walked, catching glimpses of her cleavage. Rose shook her head and quickly strode over to Trixie once the demon was out of hearing range.
"We've got to go now."
The redhead took Trixie's hand, noting that the woman looked mildly put out at the guy's ability to walk away so easily.
"Okay."
She turned her eyes on the kitchen.
"What about Kerr?"
She pointed to the lump on the kitchen island, and Rose sighed. He was passed right out, and somebody had dunked his hand in the sink. The giant wet spot on his slacks showed the results of that lovely little prank. At least in this state, he wouldn't be a target for the princess. The demon beauty queen was quickly growing her horde of followers and disappeared in a mass of bodies as she stepped down into the middle of the living room. Rose tugged Trixie towards the kitchen.
"Let's get him and go."
They grabbed Kerr's legs and swung them down over the side of the island counter. He groaned and sputtered, and Rose barely sidestepped his stream of vomit. It hit the tile with a squelch, and he heaved again, the smell of stale beer and stomach acid wafting up to the women's noses. Trixie didn't even bat an eye at the smell or display, slinging his arm over her shoulder. Rose opened her mouth to breathe, gingerly hopping over the river of beer puke to grab Kerr's other arm. She gagged slightly, but swallowed it down again as they exited the kitchen, Kerr giving a half moan and half cry as he drunkenly flopped between them.
This is nothing,"
Trixie said offhandedly.
"You should see some of the nasty shit that comes out of dudes."
"I don't know if you mean that literally, and I don't really want to know," Rose replied, wrinkling her nose. You know something?" Kerr slurred as they stumbled down the front walk, head lolling onto Trixie's shoulder. "I love you guys." He slipped down her collarbone, landing face first into her cleavage. Especially you," he mumbled into her flesh, with the boobs.
"Oh, who's a cute drunk little bear?"
Trixie cooed, petting his head like a kitten.
"Yeah, that's nice,"
he praised her. "We really need to get him back." Rose watched with disdain, and the blonde agreed. Chapter 12.
"What in the hell is going on up in here?"
Silky bellowed as the women dropped Kerr into a heap in the foyer.
"We had to get out of there pretty quick once the princess showed up,"
Rose explained, as the recruit on the floor started to roll back and forth like a turtle stuck on its shell.
You's got a funny jacket."
He broke into a fit of high-pitched giggles as he pointed at Silky.
"That skinny bitch showed up?"
The pimp cocked his head at Kerr, watching him finally manage to roll over and start attempting to crawl around on the hardwood.
"Yeah, and she got every guy there,"
Rose replied, stepping to the side to avoid Kerr's elbow as he slithered to the living room carpet.
"Except him."
"Why didn't she get him?" Silky demanded. "Cracker like smoking dick or something?"
"He might,"
the redhead shrugged, as Trixie slipped past her to take a spot on the couch with her sisters. Or it could be because he was passed out drunk. Kerr turned on elbows and knees like a stoned hermit crab and buried his face in the bottom of Silky's jacket.
God damn, Cracker!
His superior cried and kicked him square in the chest. He flopped backwards into the living room and rolled his head to look up at the three women on the couch.
Hey!
He chortled.
It's the three cocks the tears!
Why you's getting drunk on your first field mission? Silky shook his head in disappointment.
Somebody want to get old Silky a cup of coffee? We's got to get this honky sobered up.
He didn't have a choice, Rose protested as Dixie scurried off to the kitchen to grab some coffee.
He distracted the frat boys so we could operate.
Oh,
now you's defending his ass?
Silky cocked a perfectly sculpted brow. Rose pursed her lips.
Well, tell old Silky something,
he said conversationally, though there was a hint of sarcasm in his tone.
While Wonder Bread was getting lit the fuck up, what exactly did you find out, huh?
Dixie returned from the kitchen with a steaming cup of coffee, likely bitter as an old nurse from sitting on the hot plate all day.
Thanks, honey bunch,
Silky said sweetly, accepting the mug. The dark-haired hoe beamed at the endearment and practically skipped back past Kerr, who made a mad grab for her leg as she moved.
Dixie!
He missed her leg and face-planted into the shag carpet.
Well,
Rose cleared her throat, turning back to Silky.
They're having a party on the beach later.
Dixie!
Kerr squeaked out another of those high-pitched giggles and pointed at her, arm wavering.
I can make your South rise again.
He hissed the last few words, raising his fist and clenching it for emphasis.
Huh?
Dixie and Trixie shrugged at each other. Then Trixie turned to Mixie and they exchanged blank stares. Then Mixie leaned forward to look at Dixie, and they shared yet another shrug.
It's okay, hoes. Silky don't know what the fuck he's saying neither,
their pimp piped up, and Kerr turned, eyes lighting up at the coffee mug.
Here, kitty, come to old Silky for some fucking milk,
he cooed, backing up along the hardwood to coax the wobbly recruit out of the living room. As soon as Kerr crossed the threshold off of Silky's shag carpet, his superior jabbed the mug forward, flinging the entire cup of hot coffee directly into his face. The recruit stayed still for a split second, drunk brain not registering what had just transpired. But then his nerves caught up with his head and they were on fire. He started to scream as his entire face started to burn up, feeling like it was melting down onto the floor. Rose winced as Kerr went down on his forehead, the rest of his body writhing about.
You were saying?
Silky prompted her, and she blinked, turning her gaze back to him.
We should be able to apprehend one of the frat demons at this party to find out what the princess is doing to them.
She squared her shoulders back to business.
They were all over her, and we had to extract Kerr, but on the beach in the dark, we should be able to get one of the demons alone. The princess might not even be there.
All right, Silky'll buy that.
He gave in and leaned down to inspect Kerr's cherry-red face.
You sober now, bitch, or does Silky need to get you another cup of joe?
I'm good,
the recruit moaned, rolling away from him.
I'm good.
That's what Silky likes to hear, he does.
The pimp clapped his hands and tossed the mug behind him. It hit the floor and smashed into pieces. Rose winced. Why did the boss trust them to stay anywhere nice?
Get your shit together and be ready to leave in 2 hours.
Silky bellowed, and Kerr staggered to his feet, still moaning.
You still reek like booze and barf.
Rose wrinkled her nose at him as he swayed in front of her.
Ooh-wee, you ain't wrong, sister.
Silky held his nose dramatically and wandered off into the living room.
You can be paying one of Silky's hoes to bathe you, honky. Or maybe if you ask Rose real nice, she'll do it up for you for free.
Kerr raised his eyes to hers, and she waved her hands in front of her frantically.
"Oh, hell no," she said. "You can bathe yourself, thank you very much." He swayed as he trudged to the stairs, taking a deep breath before lifting a lead foot to land on the first step. Rose bit her lip as he managed to get up 2 steps before slipping and falling on his face. I'm good, he whimpered and struggled to get back to his feet. She pinched the bridge of her nose. "I'm going to regret this," she muttered, and hooked one of his arms over her shoulders to help him up the stairs. "You are so not going to regret this," Kerr promised, trying to slip his arm further around her. "I'm not bathing you. I'm just helping you up to the bathroom, you horny drunk idiot," Rose snapped. "And if you are anything less than gentlemanly, I will kick your ass back down the stairs. Understand?" He lazily curled his fingers into an A-OK sign and then went full dead weight on her. She grunted and heaved, realizing that she was willingly carrying a half-sober recruit up a flight of stairs in suburbia so he could shower before escorting her and a prostitute to a frat party. She couldn't say that agency life wasn't interesting. Chapter 13. Kerr peeked out through the hay-like grass, peering down at the beach through his binoculars. They were night vision, and he almost wished he'd worn sunglasses to stare through the damn things as the remains of his headache pulsed in the back of his head. But he was better off than he could have been. The vomiting at least had blown most of the alcohol out of his body before it had started to digest. He'd been lucky that Rose and Trixie had been able to get him out of there and away from the princess's evil wiles. "There doesn't look like there are too many of them," he said quietly. "That's good, right?" The beach behind the fraternity mansion had a bonfire that glowed a headache-inducing white in the glow of the night vision. But around it were a few staggering figures and some couples hanging off of each other in various positions up and down the sandbar. He flipped to regular vision to try to save his eyeballs and his piercing forehead, the strain, and watch for Trixie's signature blonde poof. "Could be," Silky shrugged, reclining in the pop-up chair he'd brought. "Depends." Kerr shuffled back through their camouflage, raising an eyebrow at his relaxed superior. "Depends on what?" "Just depends, cracker." Silky threw up a hand dismissively. "Just depends." The recruit sighed, not particularly enjoying being told facts without being taught how those conclusions were come to. He was supposed to be learning, right? He dug in his pocket for the little bottle of Advil that Trixie had procured for him, and popped 2, swallowing them dry. He felt a surge of bravery as he parted the grass again, taking a deep breath to ask the question he'd been burning with all day. "So, what's your story?" he asked, as casually as he could muster. "What you talking about, honky?" Silky barked, bending a leg at the knee to rest his mint green-clad arm over it. He was the pinnacle of relaxation, massive sunglasses under an equally large hat, light green velvet to match his jacket. The recruit had no idea how he could even see in those massive glasses in the dark, but questioning Silky's fashion choices seemed like a step too far. "You!" Kerr sat back again, eyeing his eccentric superior. "I mean, how the hell does a pimp end up working for a demon hunting agency?" "It's a long story, cracker," Silky drawled. "We ain't got time for that shit." "Don't have time?" the recruit scoffed. "We're hiding in bird-shit-infested grass, waiting for a bunch of frat boys to drink themselves to death. I think we got time." "Aight," the pimp sighed, leaning his head right back in his chair. "You want to know what Silky's all about, Wonder Bread? Here you go. Silky's a motherfucking angel." Kerr blinked at him. "What? Is you deaf or something, boy? Silky said he's an angel." "A pimp angel." The recruit rolled his eyes and turned back to the grass, poking the binoculars back through. Look, if you didn't want to tell me your story, you could have just said that. Silky's telling the truth, motherfucker. The pimp's voice raised an octave at his subordinate's attitude. Silky's been a top dog pimp for years, but he's always encouraged his hoes to use the money they be making to better themselves. Go to school, get an education and shit. Hoes can't fuck forever, you dig?
A pimp with a heart of gold, Kerr joked.
Goddamn right, honky, Silky snapped. Now you gonna let Silky finish or you gonna keep fucking interrupting?
By all means, continue, the recruit chuckled and backed up through the grass. He turned and sat on his haunches as the pimp slid off of his beach chair. Silky grinned his golden, toothy grin as he reached out and poked his pointer finger right into the middle of Kerr's forehead. The younger man went cross-eyed with curiosity as he tried to focus on the finger, and then the wind went out of him as his center of gravity pitched forward. Kerr blinked and realized they were standing in a massive hall, set up like a posh banquet but full of the sexiest and sluttiest women he'd ever seen. The color scheme was all deep crimson and gold, and tits, just tits everywhere.
What the?
He stammered, but was speechless as he realized there were two Silkies standing in front of him, one in the same peppermint get-up as before and another in a far more outlandish leopard print suit and coat, complete with a golden cane and a hat that had to be at least 3 feet in diameter.
As Silky was saying,
Spearmint Silky said, and his doppelganger didn't even notice his presence. Kerr's lower lip moved up and down, but no sound came out. What was happening?
About 3 years ago, Silky was hosting his annual Fucking for a Future reunion dinner for all his former hoes that made something out of themselves.
That explained the sexy women everywhere. Some were sitting at tables, some were dancing on them, some had a man or woman on their arm, others were grouped together, catching up. There were random men spattered about the group, clearly Johns that had been invited for the current hoes to proposition. Ever the businessman, Silky was. Past Silky strutted up onto the stage, spotlight flashing off of his epic grill. He had a woman on either side of him, each in a long pastel elegant gown that would have looked like something out of a prom had there not been mounds of soft flesh bursting out of the extremely low necklines. Cheers erupted throughout the hall, and Kerr stared around wide-eyed at the uproar. Everyone was hooting, hollering, up on their feet to applaud. This pimp had clearly made a difference to a lot of people. The on-stage Silky spread his arms, motioning for everyone to settle down. It took a good 2 minutes until everyone finally stopped whistling and took their seats again, giving him their undivided attention.
"Ladies and gentle hoes," he began, and a chuckle rippled through the crowd. "It's damn good to have all y'alls together again this year. My sweet-ass Lola graduated from nursing school with fucking honors last month." He clapped his hands and there was more thunderous applause. The woman to the left of him blushed hard and waved shyly to the audience, clearly not used to such praise. She turned and kissed Silky on the cheek, and he patted her backside lovingly. He turned back to the crowd, but as he opened his mouth to say more, there were 2 sharp cracks, and then all hell broke loose. Kerr had been so fixated on the show that he hadn't noticed the man with the gun stand up from his table and pop off 2 rounds directly into Silky's chest. The hoes on either side of him shrieked as he fell to his knees, looking down at the blood pouring from his heart in shock. In slow motion, people lunged forward on top of the gunman, but it was too late. The leopard-clad pimp fell back onto the stage, the tears of his hoes dripping down onto his lifeless face as they tried to rouse him back from the dead. The scene slowed down even further until it was completely frozen, and Kerr's eyes darted around, his heart pounding. He nearly jumped out of his skin when Minty Silky put a hand on his shoulder. "That cracker ass came in undercover, sent by a rival pimp to infiltrate Silky's banquet.
He motioned to the guy that was flattened beneath a tableau of angry hoes and their dates. He wasn't happy at the amount of his hoes Silky had gotten out of the game and thinking about them futures. Damn, Kerr breathed, looking up at the anguished faces of the women frozen over Silky's body. You try to do the right thing. Damn is right, Cracker. The nostalgic pimp sighed. Well, old Silky was faced with a dilemma. A bright light washed over the stage and a silver form materialized before their eyes, floating down to wash over the dead man. It slid over him, and the pimp let out a shocked gasp, crab walking backwards from the women over him that were frozen in time. He clutched at his chest that he remembered being full of bullets, and gazed open-mouthed at the vaguely humanoid wisp floating above him. Smoothen Silky. An ethereal female voice floated down around the room. You have changed many lives for the better in your short life. What in the fucking shit is this? Silky exclaimed, and leapt to his feet, personality winning out over shock as he pointed at the wisp. Silky just fucking died. How the fuck is he still standing? The voice chuckled. We want to offer you the chance to ascend to the heavens, Smoothen Silky. It purred, and he pursed his lips. Silky's not too surprised he wasn't ending up there in the first place, he admitted, but Silky ain't no chump. What's the catch, Cloud Lady? Help us with the war on demons, child, and you will live forever in the land of the angels. The voice proclaimed, and he barked a laugh. The war on fucking demons? He picked up his cane and struck a regal pose at center stage. Silky was born for that shit. The scene melted away, and Kerr had that anti-gravity feeling before falling back into the grass. He blinked. The grass. They were back at the beach. Understand, Honky? Silky leaned back in his chair once again. Not really, Kerr shook his head. I mean, you changing lives or not, why would they recruit a pimp? You a thick motherfucker sometimes, the pimp sighed. If you's a demon and you make your way up to this world from the depths of hell, what's the first fucking thing you gonna go looking for? The recruit screwed up his lips and thought. Food? Hells no! Silky threw his hands up. You's gonna go looking for a piece of ass! That's why Silky was recruited. 'Cause even up in heaven, they know that Silky's got the best pieces of ass in this world and the next. Kerr rubbed his forehead in disbelief. That's quite a story, man. Not sure if I really believe it all, but it is a hell of a story. Bitch, Silky showed you his fucking memories. What more does you need? He humphed at Kerr's shrug and then lowered his sunglasses. Believe this, Cracker, he said, and his eyes glowed into shining orbs of bright blue light. The recruit cried out, backing up a bit in the grass. All right, I'm with you, he assured him. Just, stop doing that. It's creepy. All right, motherfucker, then get your snow-white ass back to work here. Silky's eyes immediately lost the shine and fell back to their normal chocolate brown. Kerr gladly turned to look back through the grass, deciding not to ask any more questions for the moment. He'd bitten off more than he could chew with that one, though a lot of things made more sense now, even with the fantastical story he'd just been told. He was hunting frat demons, so why was it so outlandish to think that there were pimp angels too? I've got eyes on Trixie. She's leading a frisky polo shirt down the beach, Kerr reported, innately shuddering at his own stint wearing one of those atrocities. That's Silky's fucking cue. The pimp stood up, flicking the chair expertly into a neat little package that he stowed away in his amazingly spacious jacket. He drew his golf club and motioned for his recruit to follow. Rose'll be finishing up in the interrogation room. Let's skedaddle. Chapter 14. Trixie giggled as Roy tickled her ass while they crossed the threshold into the back of the beach house. Rose had procured this place for the night to interrogate their mark. Trixie whipped around and sashayed backwards through the sitting room, licking her lips as she went.
"Slow down there, big boy," she winked at him. "Let's get inside my bedroom first."
"Oh, I plan on getting inside, all right." Roy grabbed her wrist and pulled her flush against him. "Inside them pants, woo-ha!" He kissed down her throat, suckling at her collarbone, and she pushed at his chest.
"Wow, you are a frisky one,"
Trixie said, laughing nervously as he held her in place.
"Shut up, baby. You're ruining the mood,"
he said, voice hard, and wound a fist into her hair roughly. Warning bells went off in Trixie's head, and she didn't think that she was going to be able to get this guy back to the interrogation room before he overpowered her. She wriggled out of his grip, nearly managing to scurry away before he grabbed her bicep in a strong hand.
"Where you going, baby?"
Roy leered as he dragged her back against him.
"I got what you need."
He lowered his mouth to her cheek and slid his hand down her hip, toying with the waistband of her shorts.
"Okay, that's enough."
She shoved against him as hard as she could, and he snarled, backhanding her with enough force that she fell to the carpet.
"You're gonna wish you gave in, bitch!"
Roy hooked his hands in the collar of his shirt and jerked down, ripping it clean open. Trixie shrieked, holding her cheek, and scrambled backwards as fast as she could, despite her lightheadedness.
"Motherfucker!"
Silky's voice boomed, and Roy turned just in time to meet a jewelry-adorned hand that sliced his face clean open.
"Silky's gonna teach you to hit his fucking hoe."
Rose burst into the room as Roy hit the ground, gun at the ready. She knelt to check over Trixie as Kerr stepped in behind Silky, leaning down to jerk Roy up by his hair.
"Piece of shit,"
he muttered at the shirtless frat boy, and Rose's breath caught in her throat as she recognized him. She noticed Roy's glasses laying on the carpet, having fallen in the scuffle, and put them on his face, blinking in shock.
"Get his ass hooked up,"
Silky ordered, and she nodded firmly, hauling him out of the room by his arm.
"Trixie!"
Mixie squealed from the hallway, clearly having come from the kitchen if her flour-dusted apron was any indication.
"Are you okay?"
She scurried over to her fallen sister-hoe, who smiled up at her.
"I am now."
Trixie ran a hand through Mixie's honey-brown locks and shakily got to her feet. They clutched each other, and then Mixie slid a hand around the back of the blonde's neck, pulling her in for a sweet kiss. Kerr slid a $20 bill out of his pocket, holding it out to Silky, as he gazed at the two beautiful women comforting each other. The pimp grinned and took the bill, patting his recruit on the shoulder before leading him to the interrogation room. When they entered, Rose had Roy tied securely to a chair, and was standing in front of him, one hand thoughtfully on her chin as she scrutinized his face.
"Fucking buzzkill bitches!"
he spat, writhing against his bonds.
"Cock tease cunts! Get me a fucking beer! I'll drink all the fucking beer and show you who's the fucking man! My dick is so big I can fuck your ass from all the way over here, bitch! Just bend over and fucking take it!"
He continued to shriek obscenities at her, and she turned to her co-workers bewildered.
"I can't believe he's acting like this,"
Rose said, crossing her arms.
"He's a drunk frat dick. What did you expect?"
Kerr shrugged.
"You don't understand. He wasn't one of them,"
Rose insisted.
"He was a geek that got blackmailed into buying beer."
"People get crazy when they're drunk," Kerr replied, scratching the back of his head nervously. He didn't want to bring up his stint earlier that evening, as he was still a little embarrassed by his behavior.
"Damn it, it's more serious than that,"
she snapped.
"We's gonna know soon enough,"
Silky cut in.
"Where's Silky smart hoe at?"
"Her name is Kiki," Rose muttered under her breath. As if on cue, the door opened and a dark-haired woman in a white cropped blouse and red kilt strode in. Kerr's jaw dropped to the floor at her almond-shaped eyes, accentuated by delicate glasses on her flawless face. Her shapely calves were adorned with white knee socks, and the playful black Mary Janes on her feet had an impossible heel that still didn't even get her more than a head shorter than Silky.
Sorry, Silky.
She was out of breath as she lifted an aluminum case onto a table in the corner.
It took a little longer than I thought to run the talk screen.
Kiki opened the case, producing a laptop, and slid a USB stick out of her lacy red bra.
That's okay, baby,
he purred as he leaned over the computer with her.
Did you get what Silky needs?
Yes, I did, she replied excitedly as her fingers flew over the keys.
I ran a full blood talk screen and a DNA scan on him.
Her slight lean revealed the lower curve of her ass out of the bottom of her ridiculously short skirt, and Kerr fingered another $20 bill in his pocket in case the pimp turned around. Rose rolled her eyes and moved up next to the sexy schoolgirl, peering down at the computer screen. Roy's bellowing of profanities lowered to lewd talk about schoolgirls and their teachers, and Kerr clocked him on the back of the head.
Let me just bring up my data so we can analyze it,
Kiki was saying as Silky sat down, appraising her long, creamy legs.
Oh, Silky would analyze that all night long.
He winked, and she giggled as she worked. Kerr marveled at Silky's charisma, and not for the first time. But you don't get to be the most famous pimp in heaven if you're not charming. Kiki's face hardened.
Oh, no. This isn't good at all.
Talk to Silky, baby. What we got here? He leaned forward, but the graphs on the screen didn't mean anything to him.
Slut! Get over here and sit on my fucking face! I bet you taste so fucking sweet!
Roy babbled, and Kiki furrowed her brow, turning around to face their bound prisoner.
This guy is sober,
she said, and the other three stared at him, wide-eyed.
I'm going to go out on a limb and say that isn't good,
Kerr piped up.
Come on, baby, spread your fucking legs. I'ma tear you in fucking half,
Roy continued.
How can someone be that annoying and be sober?
Rose crossed her arms, eyeing him warily. She had known something was up as soon as she'd seen that it was Roy who had tried to assault Trixie. Even if he'd been lying earlier that day, pretending to be a victimized nerd to get some ass, this was too insane for him to have been fully acting.
Silky knows how a brother's going to go balls out for a nice set of titties, but god damn, this skinny bitch done drove this cracker crazy.
The princess did this? Rose motioned to him.
She can do this?
Kiki turned back to the computer and shook her head in worry.
Silky.
She tugged on his sleeve.
What is it, baby girl?
He leaned over her.
There's something much worse,
she said, and both Rose and Kerr immediately turned to look.
This is what a normal DNA chain is supposed to look like.
Kiki pointed to a diagram she'd brought up on the screen.
And this is his DNA chain. See the extra lines here and here? What you trying to say, sweet cheeks?
Silky asked.
I have a theory, but it'll be confirmed in a moment when the program is done running its calculations,
she replied, biting her lip.
DNA chains? How can she do all of this?
Kerr blurted. Silky smiled proudly.
Kiki here was the charter member in Silky's Fucking for a Future program. Graduated with a master's. Doctorate,
Kiki interjected.
Silky apologizes,
he replied, putting a hand over his chest to emphasize his guilt.
She graduated with a doctorate in some fucking techie mumbo-jumbo that your dumb ass wouldn't understand, dig?
You have no idea what it is, do you? Kerr raised an eyebrow.
Not a fucking clue,
Silky nodded.
Okay,
Kiki said, and everyone leaned back in again.
This first line is some sort of spiritual trigger. It's something that can alter DNA on a spiritual level, often driving the victim insane.
Okay, Kerr shrugged.
So what's the problem? When the spiritual trigger is activated, the victim's soul is ripped out and they spend all eternity in a painful void,
Kiki explained.
Still don't see a problem.
He shook his head.
Who cares if a bunch of dickhole frat boys lose their souls? Motherfucker! Think of Silky's profits!
The pimp smacked Kerr on the back of the head.
If all these dumb-ass white boys get their souls ripped out, then who's gonna partake in Silky's fine-ass assortment of hoes? And it's not just that, Kiki added. Often, when such a trigger is activated, it is for something much more sinister. Such as, Rose prompted, lips in a thin line. The most common use is to summon a legendary demon.
She adjusted her glasses on her face, turning back to Roy.
Legendary demon?
Kerr asked. What do we do if that happens? He cracked his knuckles.
Be somewhere else.
Kiki shoved his fist down with a sigh.
Those demons are powerful enough that they've been sealed away by the agency's predecessors. They have been increasing in power, and since they've been locked away in their own personal hell, they typically come out very, very pissed off.
Wait! You work for the agency too? Kerr stared at her, taken aback.
Of course I do.
She shrugged. Why? He motioned to her outfit, and then ran a hand through his hair to try to recover his possible rudeness.
Just because I'm a professional doesn't mean I can't dress up in a sexy outfit.
Kiki winked at Silky, and he tipped his hat to her.
Truer words ain't never been spoke, baby doll.
He purred, and she giggled. So, Kerr prompted and coughed, trying to direct the conversation away from his hormonally charged question.
Legendary demons have escaped before. We try to make sure it doesn't get to that point,
Rose replied, taking her bottom lip between her teeth as she continued to watch Roy thrash about and yell.
But it has happened before. The last time, it took 17 agents to bring it down.
She looked him dead in the eye.
Only 2 walked away.
Okay, Kerr gulped. Let's make sure it doesn't get to that point.
Oh, fuck,
Kiki blurted, snapping everyone to attention.
We're in trouble. Talk to Silky, baby.
Silky leaned forward. Her almond eyes were wide as she turned to him.
The second chain is a tracer strain.
Chapter 15. Kiki slammed the laptop shut, shoving it quickly back in the aluminum case.
Get the other hoes and get out of here.
Silky pointed a finger at her and then turned quickly to Rose.
You be taking care of our boy there and then get out the back. Wonder Bread, you be coming with Silky to the basement. The basement? What?
Kerr threw his hands up.
What's a tracer strain? God damn it, you honky numbskull! How in the fuck did you pass your entrance exam?
Silky grabbed the back of the recruit's collar and hauled him through the house.
Tracer strain means they know where we's at. They's tracking us.
Oh, Kerr mentally smacked himself.
Fuck. That's right, fuck.
The pimp nodded as they reached the basement door. There was a sound of glass shattering as he opened the door and waved the recruit inside.
Good luck, cracker. Wait. What about you?
Kerr asked in a panic.
Hoes before bros, motherfucker.
Silky gave a little salute and held out his 9-iron like a baseball bat.
Once they's safe, Silky'll be back to get you. But get your honky ass down them fucking stairs.
His eyes blazed.
All right.
Kerr scowled, reluctantly descending the steps. Rose sighed as she unsheathed her ceremonial knife, looking down at Roy with sadness in her gaze. He really had been a nice nerd.
I'm sorry, Roy,
she said sincerely.
You didn't deserve this.
Go fuck yourself, bitch!
He started, spittle flying from his maniacal mouth, but she cut him off by burying the blade into his skull. He disintegrated into demon gunk right before her eyes, and she pursed her lips at the fact that it was indistinguishable from any other demon gunk. The poor guy had deserved better. She reached up to touch her cheek in shock, finding a tear there. She brushed it away with a ragged gasp and shoved any more thoughts of Roy out of her head. It was time to get the fuck out of Dodge. Rose slid the knife back into her combat boot and moved silently down the hallway. She slipped into the kitchen and immediately vaulted over the island as pink shirts barreled in from every angle. She scrambled up onto the far counter, hoping to get to the window over the sink, but a firm hand clamped around her ankle. She snatched a baking sheet from the sink, whipping it in a tight arc to smash into the frat dick's face. He dodged but let go of her ankle to tuck and roll away, leaving a second guy to pop up on her other side. She swung her legs out of his reach and leapt for the island again in a twisted game of the floor is made of lava. Pots and pans cackled against each other as she bumped the hanging shelf with her shoulder. She dropped the baking sheet with a metallic clang onto the tile floor and took a cast iron skillet in hand, bringing it down hard on the head of the attacker trying to pop up from below. She swept her leg around with a whoosh, aiming for another face to her right, and when she missed, he jumped up beside her. He grabbed the hanging shelf of kitchen utensils and jerked down, stainless steel and iron crushing her beneath the wooden frame. She cried out and wriggled as hard as she could, managing to slip out from beneath the trap and hit the tile floor with a hard smack. A heavy lump landed on her back, knocking the wind out of her, and she lost her grip on the heavy pan. She reached out blindly as a fist wound its way into her hair and yanked on a drawer, wrenching it free and flinging it back over her head. It connected with something, and wooden spoons rained down on top of her, bouncing and clattering all around. Her attacker grunted, and she managed to squirm away from him, his hands groping for her legs as she did so. She got to her feet and opened the freezer door just in time to clothesline a guy making a run at her, and he fell onto drawerhead on the floor. She turned tail and bolted for the door, but another frat boy slammed into her midsection and tackled her to the tile. She screamed in frustration as another one joined his friend, and between the two of them, they were able to pin her before she could get at her knife in her boot. She spat and kicked and shrieked, but they overpowered her, flipping her face down onto the floor.
I will fucking end you, motherfuckers!
Rose cried as they secured her wrist behind her back with zip ties, and then her ankles. One of them dislodged the ceremonial knife and buried it into the wall as they hauled the snarling wildcat of a woman out the back door.
Go on, babes. Silky'll see you soon.
The pimp in the mint green suit handed Kiki the keys to the truck.
You be safe, love.
She ran a hand down his face and kissed his lips softly, languidly. He wanted to drop his cane and bury himself into her right there in the sand, but Smoothen Silky had a recruit to take care of.
Don't you be worrying about old Silky,
he said with a squeeze of her tight ass and bit his lip.
He's gonna be just fine. You hoes take care of each other now. Get the fuck out of here.
He watched them barrel into the truck, Mixie at the wheel, and speed away towards the parking lot. He turned and jogged back to the house, staying low in the shadows in case of any uninvited frat dicks. He peered in through the front window, and there was nobody there. An angry screech filled the air as his blood ran cold. That was Rose's voice. Silky barreled through the door, hurtling through the house just in time to see through the backsliding door. There were two pink shirts carrying Rose's thrashing form off the porch into the sand. He lunged forward, but two pink blurs swept into the way, knocking him back.
Silky's had fucking enough of you needle dick pussies.
He lifted his 9-iron and his left leg, hopping in a graceful roundhouse kick that his opponents didn't expect. Upon landing, he jabbed out with his fist, connecting with a demon jaw, the force of his punch crushing cartilage and bone. Two more polo shirts burst into the room and made to tackle him from behind, but he ducked and rolled under them. One ended up hitting his buddy like a bowling ball, but the other wised up and tucked his shoulder into a somersault to land on his feet. Silky took advantage of the confusion to hurl his body into a front flip, bringing his heel down onto an upturned face. The crunch of his skull was telling, and the pimp smirked as he lashed out with the golf club and caught another frat dick in the chin. That one crumbled to the carpet, and Silky drew his knife, executing a perfect cartwheel and using the momentum to plunge it into the asshole's throat. He gasped in a series of squelching swallows, and one of the other frat guys immediately hurled himself out the sliding door, running scared from the experienced killer. The one with the flattened face moaned as he attempted to sit up.
"Where's you think you going, Pinkie Pie?"
Silky sneered and drove his knife into the guy's ass cheek, causing a surprised scream to tear its way out of his mouth before he passed out from the sheer pain that had been rained down on him. 3 down, 1 to go, and that one was dancing back and forth in front of the sliding door. Silky raised an eyebrow as the frat asshole performed a pretty impressive dropkick and a few well-executed punches to the air in front of him.
"Oh, you's gonna show Silky a thing or two, huh?"
The pimp raised his eyebrows in skepticism.
"Aye, bitch, come on."
Kerr started to case the entire basement, trying to ignore the thumping and clanging from upstairs. He feared Silky's wrath for not following orders more than the demons attacking the beach house, so he did as he was told. Rose and Silky could handle themselves. His job was to take care of the basement. He slowly moved in the darkness, straining his eyes. Every box and blanket down there looked like a humanoid shape, but nothing was moving. His senses were on such high alert that when the shriek of an angry woman pierced the air, it seemed to slam into his eardrums like a skewer. He'd found the window that he'd heard break from the top of the stairs, and though it was right at the top of the wall at ground level, he was tall enough to peer outside. The scream had clearly come from the beach. His heart skipped a beat when he saw 2 frat dicks making off with his struggling and bound co-worker. "Rose!" he yelled, and tried to aim his gun through the broken glass. They were too far away for a handgun. Fuck! He took a second to decide whether to try to wriggle through the window and risk slicing himself into ribbons, or take the extra time to run back upstairs and out the back door. Every second counted. He turned to make a mad dash for the stairs and slammed right into a pink-clad chest. Kerr looked up into the glowing eyes of the biggest frat boy he'd ever seen and curled his hand into a fist. But the guy was more beast than man at this point, and he grabbed the recruit's shirt, tossing him into the concrete wall like a rag doll. The wind tore out of him like a storm, and he coughed as he staggered to his feet, scrambling for his gun. The frat dick was standing stock still, eyes glazed as if thinking really hard about something. Before Kerr could find his gun, the guy turned abruptly like a robot, heading for the stairs. The recruit's eyes widened when he realized that this brainwashed frat asshole probably was very much like a robot, and barked a laugh to get his attention.
"Where do you think you're going, dickhead?"
Kerr wheezed, injecting as much bravado into his voice as possible.
"You had enough of Kerr? Or are you just afraid that you're going to get your ass kicked?"
He shoved his hand into his back pocket, retrieving a small device he'd been saving for a special occasion. Polo Shirt hesitated, his lips twitching into a sneer, but then back to a thin line as he turned to the stairs again.
"Ho, I get it,"
Kerr laughed and injected his voice with as much smooth and silky attitude as he could muster.
"You ain't nothing but a pussy."
The guy whipped around, anger in his hellish eyes, and stalked back to where his heckler was bouncing back and forth from foot to foot.
"That's what I thought, you piece of—"
Kerr was cut off by the superhuman frat boy snatching his throat in giant hands and lifting him off the ground.
"Shit!"
He choked, but managed to slip the device under the pink polo collar as he slapped the asshole with his other hand. The guy threw his forehead into Kerr's nose with a sickening crunch and then dropped him in a heap on the basement floor. The recruit gasped for air as the frat dig marched away from him and up the stairs. This fucking job. Silky wrapped his bejeweled hand around the doorknob of the dining room, leaning down to give his prisoner a menacing grin.
"Where they taking her?"
he asked with sugary sweetness, and when he didn't get an answer, he slammed the door on the fucker's ugly face. The frat boy groaned in pain, and it was music to the pimp's ears.
Silky asked you a question, frat fuck, he said. Where'd they fucking taken her?
You can't stop us,
the pink-clad guy hissed, gargling blood in his throat.
Oh, yeah?
Silky slammed the door 2 more times and then rapped the head of his 9-iron against his enemy's nose.
How's that feel, motherfucker? Now, Silky ain't gonna ask again. Where'd they taken her?
Fuck you, pimp!
The words were even more garbled.
You lose!
Silky let out a cry of frustration and slammed the door completely, severing the asshole's head from his body. For good measure, he plunged his ceremonial knife into the center of that god-awful pink polo shirt, reveling in the nasty goo that spread out over the carpet. He skirted it as he sheathed his knife, heading through the kitchen around to the basement door. As he opened it, a bloody hand reached up from the stairs and Kerr groaned.
Goddamn, Cracker! Somebody done fucked your ass up!
Silky reached down to grab the recruit's hand, pulling him through the door with concern in his eyes.
Well,
Kerr grinned through the blood pouring from his nose as he managed to stand up straight.
I guess it's better to have my ass fucked up instead of just plain fucked. Boy, this ain't no time for words of wisdom bullshit,
Silky snapped, wringing his hands around the golf club's handle.
We's in some serious trouble. Tell me about it,
Kerr replied, motioning to his likely broken nose.
Cracker, I ain't playing.
The pimp narrowed his eyes.
They's got Rose.
I know.
They's got Rose and they's planning something big.
Silky started to pace, slamming the club against the tile with every step like a heavy walking stick.
I know. Silky don't think you do, Cracker.
He turned and pointed the head of the club in Kerr's direction, eyes wilder than the recruit had ever seen them.
Rose ain't one of Silky's hoes. We got no way to track her.
I know.
Goddamn, Silky's getting tired of your shit, boy.
Even through his words of panic, he still sounded cool as a cucumber, and the recruit marveled at how together his superior was in a time of crisis.
Silky ain't finished. Your dumb ass got any idea what's gonna happen if we can't find them?
Silky?
Bad motherfucking shit, that's what. We's gonna get our asses reamed, and that's even assuming that we be surviving this shit.
Silky rambled.
God damn it, would you shut the fuck up, you ignorant pimp?
Kerr cried, throwing his hands up in the air. His superior blinked at him, drawing his shoulders back, cocking his head ever so slightly. His deep-set eyes narrowed the tiniest bit, and he clicked his tongue.
Is you out of your goddamn mind, Hunky?
Even though I'm pretty sure I left part of my mind on the wall downstairs, Kerr put his hands up in front of him, taking a deep breath. I was able to put a tracker on the guy that was beating me to a pulp, which means we can track them with this. He wiggled his phone in the air, and his breathing returned to normal as Silky's mouth spread into a wide grin on his face. He looked like a kid on Christmas morning, eyes alight with glee at the news.
If we survive this shit, you's gonna get a free hoe on Silky,
he promised, slinging the golf club up to rest over his shoulder.
Really?
Kerr returned his smile, bloody face and all.
Do I get to pick? Don't be pushing it, boy.
Silky's choice. The recruit nodded. That's cool. Silky clapped Kerr on the back and barked a laugh.
My cracker's growing up fast.
He pretended to wipe a tear from his face.
All right, let's go save Rose.
Kerr held up the phone, running the companion app to the tracking device. Silky raised the golf club in the air like a sword.
Lead on, my hunky.
Chapter 16. Rose twisted as best she could, but it was no use. These demons apparently had supernatural knot-tying powers as well as their glowing eyes and ability to drink infinite amounts of beer.
Save your strength, my dear. You're going to need it,
a regal voice declared, and a familiar beauty queen stepped into Rose's view, complete with a crown. Rose raised an eyebrow, not having expected this bitch to show up at the frat boy's altar party.
The princess.
She pursed her lips and started wriggling anew. This could not be good. The 6 frat boys kneeling around her half-naked and bound form had been disconcerting enough, but this was probably going to end far worse than if they'd been in charge.
You know who I am?
The blonde raised a delicate hand to Rose's face, drawing a pink fingernail down the curve of her cheekbone.
I'm impressed. I wasn't aware that the agency knew of my existence.
Well, what do you expect? The redhead asked with her signature eye roll.
How many innocent people have you killed? 10? 20? The agency was going to get wind of you eventually.
She hoped she could keep the bitch talking long enough for that agency to come to her rescue.
My dear, the men that have fallen before me are but the tip of the iceberg.
The princess smiled daintily, drawing her fingernail down Rose's collarbone, reaching the swell of her lace-clad breast.
After tonight, there won't be a man or woman that will be able to resist us.
To accentuate her point, she took the bound woman's nipple through the thin silk of her bra and twisted it cruelly.
Us?
Rose seethed with the sharp pain of it, but was determined to keep the conversation going.
What are you planning? Why am I here? Patience, my dear, patience.
The woman looked like a valley girl but talked like a debutante, and it was really starting to annoy the agent who was being subjected to this tripe.
You mustn't tire yourself out yet. Yeah, because I'm going to need that energy to shove that tiara straight up your ass.
Rose snapped, and the blonde stared down her perfect button nose at her foul-mouthed prisoner.
Not exactly what I had in mind,
she said, and moved away from the altar, gliding with practiced grace behind one of the kneeling frat demons.
You see, my dear, my powers are profound by mortal standards. Do you realize what an act of God it is to make 6 frat boys sit silently on the beach when there is a house party just 1 block over? Do you?
She slid her hand up over the guy's head, scratching behind his ear like a dog, and his eyes closed in elation. The gentle swish, swish of the waves in the background were a strange, soothing contrast to the twisted display.
While you're doing all women a service with that, why do I get the feeling there's more to it than that?
Rose inquired wryly, realizing that she'd twisted her wrist raw at this point. She wasn't getting out of the ropes. Her only hope of survival now was to stall as best she could.
You're quite right,
the princess agreed, and slid a knife from the folds of her skirt, holding it to the frat boy's throat.
You see, I crave more power. I want more than just the admiration of annoying little schoolboys who have no idea how to worship a woman properly.
With that, she fisted his hair and drew the blade across his neck from ear to ear without even a blink.
Jesus Christ!
Rose blurted as the pink-clad body hit the sand.
You killed him! Yes.
The princess ran a finger up the blade, fraternity blood pooling along her skin. She reached out and drew a line down Rose's arm with it, causing the redhead to shrink away in disgust.
However, unlike so many of us, his death shall not be in vain. His death will help bring about a new order on this planet. His death will help fulfill my destiny.
She stabbed the 2nd frat boy in the heart, and he fell to the ground with a grateful smile on his face. She wiped the blood and drew it down her prisoner's other arm, tattooing her with death.
So what?
Rose demanded.
Are you going to kill me too, skinny bitch? Oh, no, my dear,
the princess tittered.
Your death, like these before you, will have meaning, but it will not be by my hands.
She stabbed the 3rd guy in the back this time and then wiped the blade itself across Rose's forehead, leaving swipes of crimson on her creamy skin.
It will be at the hands of the king of the beach.
Who?
He is the one who will fulfill my destiny.
the blonde purred, gutting the fourth frat boy with an expert stroke. His blood went along Rose's left leg, and then the fifth down her right. The Princess of Death stood behind the sixth and final pink-clad asshole, rubbing his chin in an almost sensual way.
When this boy's blood hits the sand, the king of the beach shall be reborn,
she said, voice carrying on the sea's gentle breeze.
He will rise from the sea and take your life force for himself.
Great, Rose sighed.
I'm a sacrificial offering?
The princess's eyes lit up with a wistful nostalgia, and she stared down at the redhead with an almost tender longing.
He's going to fuck the life out of you,
she said.
You have been marked with the blood of the innocent. After he has your life force and consumes the innocent blood from you, he will be more powerful than anything that has walked the earth. After that, there is nothing your friends at the agency can do.
Don't be so sure, bitch, Rose smirked, eliciting a confused gaze from the demon princess, and she turned to look at what the redhead had spotted.
All right, sugar tits, Silky's here to put an end to all this bullshit.
The pastel suede pimp stood with his legs apart in the sand, trusty 9-iron out in front of him in his signature pose. Kerr had his handgun aimed at the demon's face, bits of paper towel shoved in his nostrils.
What are you?
The princess's nose wrinkled in disgust.
Smoothen Silky and his hunky sidekick,
Silky smirked,
and we's here to whoop your skinny little ass. I know someone who might take offense to that,
the princess replied, and pinched the frat boy's shoulder, simultaneously snapping her fingers on her other hand. He stood up like a shot, turning to the newcomers as he cracked his massive knuckles. Kerr narrowed his eyes at the nemesis he'd faced in the basement.
God damn, that's one big-ass fucking frat boy.
Silky let out an impressed whoosh of his breath.
He's mine,
the recruit grunted, sounding slightly less intimidating with his nose plugged.
You out of your mind, boy?
Silky asked.
Just be ready with the 9-iron,
Kerr growled and stepped forward.
All right, motherfucker. It's time for round 2. I hope you brought your A-game because you're going to need it to walk away from this one.
He cracked his neck in a display of dominance. The frat boy was stone-faced, under the prince's spell, and thundered towards Kerr like a predator. When he was a few steps away, the recruit popped a round in each of his kneecaps and screamed for the golf club. Silky tossed it, and Kerr snatched it out of the air just in time to smash the frat boy down to the sand, crushing his head in one swift blow.
No!
Rose cried, letting out a sigh of frustration. They'd played right into the princess's hands.
That is cold fucking blooded, Cracker,
Silky commended, and they both froze as the princess began to laugh.
That can't be good,
Kerr commented, fist clenching around his gun. A flash of light drew their attention, and they looked up to see a glowing pod shoot down from the clouds like a meteor and plunge into the ocean below.
You completed the spiritual trigger.
The blonde demon spread her arms like wings, letting the breeze wash over her.
The king has been reborn.
Let's go get this bitch. Silky took the 9-iron out of Kerr's hand, and the recruit's arm fell limp.
Cracker?
He smacked Kerr's shoulder and realized his line of sight was directly at the ample cleavage of the demon before him.
God damn it!
He backhanded his newest co-worker, knocking him to the ground. Useless.
There's no man on earth that can resist my tits,
the princess cackled madly.
I'll just have to use them on you instead.
The pimp swung his trusty club around like a bowstaff, flinging frat boy blood all over the place. The princess furrowed her brow at the fact that he was unfazed by her tits, ignoring the crimson splattering all over her.
I don't understand,
she cried, and tore the front of her shirt open, letting her milk bags fly free.
Why won't you submit to my tits? 'Cause as voluptuous as them titties are, Silky grinned toothily and then gave her a solid backhand, the smack reverberating in the night air. That shit don't work on angels. The princess started to crawl away, hand to her cheek in shock. Silky turned to Rose, bound to an altar in nothing but her skivvies, and rushed over. He'd never seen his partner so helpless, and it lit a vengeful fire in him that he normally reserved for protecting his hoes. "We have to get out of here," she insisted as he used his ceremonial knife to cut the ropes. "I think she summoned a legendary demon." "Silky, here's your baby doll," he assured her as he helped her to her feet. "As soon as Silky takes care of that bitch, we's be on our way." He tightened his grip on the knife, but Rose slid a hand around his tricep. "Don't worry about it," she said. "That cunt is about to get what she deserves." "Okay, Silky trusts you." He nodded to Kerr. "Let's get our honky and get the fuck out of here." They hurried through the sand to the recruit's crumbled form, and Rose reached down, snatching up his gun. Silky smacked the kid a few times, getting quite a few good licks in before the lump started to stir. What happened?" Kerr moaned, and Silky hauled him to his feet by the back of his collar. "You got caught staring at them enchanted titties, so Silky had to knock you the fuck out," the pimp told him. "Fair enough." Kerr rubbed the back of his neck, and upon realizing Rose was standing next to him in lacy black lingerie, tried very hard to ignore it. "Get your ass moving, honky," Silky urged, giving him a shove. "We's gotta move." Rose cocked the gun for effect, and the three took off down the beach. The princess was still in shock. That ridiculously dressed man had raised his hand to her, hit her like a common whore. She cradled her cheek on her knees in the sand, tears streaming down her face. An angel. Her miracle tits didn't work on angels. What was the point of all of this then? She was supposed to get whatever she wanted, and right then she wanted to finish the ritual. She stood on shaky legs and turned to the altar, finding it empty. She stumbled over, tears still flowing, pulling more and more mascara with it. She grasped the ropes with white knuckles and let out a frustrated cry, cursing the heavens for their plan-ruining angels. She turned her head as something moved in her periphery, and her eyelids seemed to blink lazily of their own accord at the sight of a very wet and very naked toned god of a man slowly gliding through the sand. She licked her lips slowly and cursed how crazed she must look with her makeup all over the place. But realization started to set in as she noticed that he was literally gliding through the air. It wasn't just a graceful illusion. When his eyes fell on her, zoning in on the blood splatters from Silky's golf club, her veins turned to ice. "Oh, no," she whispered. "No, no, no." Her voice rose and she turned to run, but the man moved like the wind, practically appearing in front of her. "Oh yeah, baby." The king of the beach sneered down at her with lusty, murderous eyes. "You're mine." Chapter 17. "What the fuck are we supposed to do now?" Kerr blurted, sick of silence. Silky had been pacing the shag carpet in the safe house living room for a solid 10 minutes without a word. The only noise was the clickety-clack of Rose's laptop and the occasional clang of a pot or pan from the kitchen. He wasn't sure which 2 out of 3 hoes was in there, but the tantalizing smell of baked goodies was distracting. "Hello?" Kerr waved his hands over his head. "What the fuck do we do now? Just sit here and hope everything magically works out?" "Calm down, cracker," Silky replied, flicking his hand dismissively. "We's don't even know what we's up against yet. Rose, baby, you's got the agency yet?" "Just holding for the boss," the redhead replied, and set her laptop down on the coffee table, turning it to face the room. Aight. Silky rubbed his hands together and sat down on the couch, leaning into frame. Kerr shuffled forward to do the same, and Rose backed up to allow Mixie access to the table. She was wearing an apron,
and as she bent over to set down a tray of coffee and cookies, Kerr realized she was wearing only an apron. Silky cleared his throat, and the recruit crumpled up a $20 bill and tossed it without his eyes, leaving the hoe's shapely ass as she walked away.
"You's gonna be putting my hoes through college, mozzarella?"
The pimp flattened the bill and slipped it into his jacket with a grin. "Silky, what the hell is going on down there?" The screen flickered and a very concerned-looking man appeared. "Our satellite surveillance is going crazy. In the last half hour, the demon activity near the beach is up 2,000%. What the fuck happened?"
"Well, boss, it's like this."
The pimp sighed.
"That skinny bitch summoned a legendary fucking demon."
"Oh, sweet mother of God!"
The boss's eyes widened to what seemed like double their normal size.
"Which one?"
"She called it the King of the Beach," Rose piped up.
"Excuse me?" the boss replied, blinking at the camera and leaning in as if trying to hear better. "What did you say, Rose?"
She leaned into frame to look at him. "The King of the Beach."
"Silky, I can't stress this enough," the boss said hurriedly. "You must destroy it before it gets out of town."
"Silky plans on it, boss man, but why's the urgency?"
Silky raised an eyebrow.
"What happens if this cat gets out of the bag?"
"I was part of the team that had to bring this demon down back in the 60s.
The boss ran a hand up the back of his head shakily, and Rose marveled at the motion. She'd never seen her usually stoic and professional superior act so nervous.
"This fucker is bad news, let me tell you."
"What was he trying to do? Kill everyone?" Rose inquired. "Wipe a town off the map?"
"Worse." The boss pursed his lips. "His sole purpose was to turn the world into a giant spring break."
"That doesn't sound so bad,"
Kerr shrugged. "Think about it this way." His superior's eyes hardened. "Would you want to live in a world where every guy acts like an annoying, drunken frat boy?"
"No, that doesn't sound appealing,"
Kerr said immediately, mouth turning downward into a disgusted frown.
"But what about the women?"
"The women all act like drunken whores."
"Okay, that does sound appealing,"
Kerr grinned. "Well," the boss replied, brow furrowing in annoyance, "much like in your everyday life, these women aren't going to pay any attention to you. The only thing on their mind is the King of the Beach, and that's the problem with this particular demon. If he gets his way, everyone in the world will be on permanent spring break, and since all of the men want to be like him, and the women won't put out for anyone but him—"
"Nobody's fucking,"
Kerr finished, eyes round as saucers.
"It'd be the end of the human race." "Don't be worrying, boss man. Silky ain't gonna let that happen."
The pimp saluted the laptop. "I should hope not," the boss said gravely. "I'm sending in the only reinforcements I have in the area."
"Who we getting?"
Silky asked. "TNT."
"Shit balls covered in gravy, boss. That's all we need,"
the pimp said, slapping his knee. "Good to hear that, Silky," the boss nodded. "Rose, I'm sending the satellite images to you, as well as the coordinates of where we think the King of the Beach is."
"Got it, boss," the redhead confirmed.
One more thing." He put up a hand. "I don't know if TNT will be able to reach you before you begin your assault. To be on the safe side, I am sending him directly to the site."
"Got it."
"Silky, if you fail this mission, we may never be able to get this close to the king again." The boss clenched his jaw. "The whole world is riding on your shoulders."
"Silky's got you covered, boss," the pimp assured him. "Don't you be worrying your pretty little head about it."
"That's good to hear." The boss gave a firm nod of his head. "Good luck." The screen went black, and Silky scooped up a fresh chocolate chip cookie from the plate Mixie had brought.
"All right, let's get this shit started,"
he said, and shoved the whole cookie in his mouth. Silky stood and headed over to the bay window at the front of the house, where a long leather case was propped up in the corner. He pulled it from its leaning position and caressed the worn fabric like it was the skin of his lover. "What are you doing?" Kerr asked, his curiosity getting the best of him as he approached, a cookie in each hand.
"We be in some dangerous times, honky," Silky said gravely, "so we be needing all the help we can get."
"So what? Is there a bazooka in there?" The recruit shrugged.
"Bazookas ain't got shit on this.
The pimp patted the top of the bag lovingly.
Sucker, you know what this is?
No, Kerr mumbled through a mouthful of sugary dough. I thought this was why we were having this conversation. His vision momentarily exploded as his superior backhanded him, sending crumbs flying everywhere.
Don't you be getting smart around the club, Snowball,
Silky snapped and slowly lifted the tip of the case. He reached in and wrapped his hand around the battle-worn handle of a rusty golf club. He pulled it out inch by inch, reveling in the feel of comfort and power thrumming through his nerves as he clutched it.
What in God's name is this?
Kerr threw his hands up.
This here is Silky's great-great-grandfather's 9-iron.
The pimp smiled fondly at the club, holding it horizontally in gentle hands.
Silky is a 5th-generation pimp, and this club is his connection to the past.
But what good is this to us? Kerr asked.
It doesn't look like it could chip you out of a sand trap. How is it going to help us fight a demon? Boy, let Silky fucking tell you something.
His superior snapped.
When you's at the demon-killing level that Silky's at, you's be getting a legendary weapon. This here be Silky's.
Legendary weapon? Kerr blinked.
What the? See, when old Silky here was transformed into an angelic demon-busting machine, they's offered Silky a legendary weapon to fuck them demons up with,
he explained.
Silky could have had anything. Swords, guns, a holy fucking flamethrower, whatever old Silky wanted.
And you chose this rusted piece of...
You best be watching your fucking mouth, boy,
Silky warned.
This here 9-iron'll beat the shit out of you and rip your soul right out of that little white ass. It's been blessed by the higher up at the agency. Hell, even the motherfucking Pope put his blessing on this here club.
All right, that's good enough for me. Kerr put his hands up in surrender. If you think that thing is going to be able to take this demon out, then by all means use it.
All right,
Silky nodded.
You's got your shit together, Cracker?
You know it. The recruit produced his trusty handgun and cocked it. Silky grinned his golden grin.
Let's do this.
Chapter 18. Fueled by sugar and caffeine, the trio used the agency's intel to track the king of the beach to a small warehouse out in the middle of nowhere. After ditching the car a little ways away, they crept through the trees to peer down at their target. The forest was eerily quiet, not a bird nor cricket to be heard. A dim, ethereal glow fell over the roof of the warehouse from the moon above. Rose inhaled deeply, enjoying the scent of wood and grass. She much preferred this atmosphere to the beach. Being covered in sand wasn't her forte. She absently rubbed at her chafed wrist. Neither was being almost sacrificed to a legendary demon.
Okay, how are we going to do this?
Kerr hissed eagerly, ready to spring into action.
Damn, you's an impatient little motherfucker, ain't you?
Silky raised an eyebrow as the recruit bounced on the balls of his feet.
I'm just ready to get this over with,
Kerr replied with a sly smile.
I got a nice shiny hole waiting for me to save the world.
The pimp barked a laugh.
Alright, Silky likes your enthusiasm. You's head down there and show this pimp what you made of, honky.
Kerr gulped, bouncing, stopping immediately.
By myself? You scared, boy?
Well, no.
What you be waiting for then?
Silky urged, motioning to the building below.
Hop to it, Cracker. Silky ain't got all fucking night.
Kerr took a deep breath and drew his gun, cocking it with a flourish.
Whoa, Cracker, the fuck you think you's doing?
Silky exclaimed. The recruit raised his eyebrows. Showing you what I'm made of?
You can't be going around using that hand cannon, dumbass,
the pimp hissed.
Why not?
Kerr argued defensively. He didn't have a fancy legendary weapon. He deserved something.
'Cause we's covert, motherfucker,
Silky sighed in frustration.
You go shooting that thing off, and we be up to our asses in frat dicks. You want that?
Well, no. Kerr lowered his gaze.
Goddamn right you don't, white bread fucking meathead.
The pimp rolled his eyes.
Now go on and show old Silky all them fancy moves you be learning at the academy.
The recruit holstered his gun, cracked his neck, and then cracked his knuckles. Aight. He rolled his shoulders in tandem with Rose rolling her eyes.
This should be good,
she muttered as Kerr slipped off into the trees. He reappeared a few moments later, behind the two frat boys guarding the door. He brought the side of his hand down to chop one throat, while simultaneously lashing out with his leg to kick the second one in the ribs. As they both collapsed, he brought his feet together around the first one's ears and twisted, snapping his neck in a clean break. He flipped forward, legs sailing up above him to land on the second one's neck, effectively crushing his windpipe. Kerr stood and cracked his knuckles again, admiring his handiwork as the second frat boy gasped the last few breaths of his life. Rose and Silky strutted up casually as if out for an evening stroll, and Kerr puffed out his chest. Silky slapped him in the back of the head.
"Cracker, this ain't any time to be posing," the pimp said. "We's got work to do."
Rose snorted as she opened the door, motioning for the guys to enter with a pretty flick of her wrist. Kerr pouted at her as he slunk inside, shoulders slumped, and she rolled her eyes for the second time that night. The halls were dead quiet as they moved through the bare concrete building. The vague smell of oil lingered in the air, and Kerr wondered what the warehouse had been used for.
"We's got the right place or what?"
Silky hissed, and Rose lowered her gun to show him her phone's screen. A blue glowing dot showed their location inside of a bright red hot zone on a map.
"This is the right place,"
she assured him.
"There's something here. We just have to find it."
They slowly moved in triangular formation into a large open space, likely the warehouse proper. There were cardboard boxes all over the place, adorned with large H's in an old font and logo that Kerr didn't recognize. This place must have been out of business for a long time. As he was studying one of the boxes, it wiggled a touch, and he jumped back, raising his weapon.
"What the fuck was that?"
he whispered, more to himself than anything. But all three were at attention as more rustling happened behind them.
"I've got a bad feeling about this,"
Rose said quietly, swinging her gun around, and Silky threw his hands up.
"Goddamn, woman! Why's you gotta go saying shit like that?"
He turned to her, exasperated.
"Don't you be watching no horror movies? Every time somebody says that shit, they end up fucked. And not in the good way."
The boxes in front of Kerr shuffled as three frat boys bumped their way around them, lopsided grins on their faces.
"See?"
Silky raised his club.
"It's just a couple of them,"
Kerr insisted. "We aren't fucked." As if on cue, a multitude of frat dicks in pukey pink polo shirts slid out from boxes on all sides, circling the trio in a foreboding arc. Silky glared at Kerr, mouth twisted into a condescending knot. "Okay, now we're fucked," the recruit acquiesced, cursing his quick mouth. The frat dicks started to close the circle, getting closer to the trio of demon fighters that stood back to back in a protective triangle.
"I hope yous be ready for this, Cracker."
Silky raised his trusty, rusty club like a samurai sword.
"This ain't gonna be pretty."
Kerr cocked his gun for effect, locking his elbow. "I'm ready. Let's do this." Rose slipped her phone into the side pocket of her tight cargo pants and released her favorite retractable police baton with her free hand.
"Let's get it on,"
she sneered, and with cat-like speed raised her gun and popped a bullet right between the eyes of the nearest frat boy. His body hitting the ground like a wet rag was the catalyst that drove everyone to action, and the battlefield was a blur of pink as the group descended on their foes. Kerr shot twice, then flipped his gun to smash another in the face, at too close a range to be firing. His free hand curled into a fist, and he punched a nearby nutsack, bringing his knee up to crunch a nose. Rose fired a belly shot and then used the back of her doubled-over victim to launch herself up onto a stack of boxes. Luckily, the cardboard was filled with something firm, so she had easy footing on the stack, and started popping off headshots to cover Kerr and Silky. The pimp himself whirled around with his club in a graceful swoop, white jacket fluttering behind him like angel wings. He raised his foot to kick a frat dick square in the chest, but a body flew into him from behind. He barely stumbled before flipping the guy over his head and righting himself, but his glasses fell off in the process. As they staggered against the concrete, it was as if time slowed down for the wide-eyed demon slayer. "My glasses," he said, his voice a low husk. "You motherfuckers broke Silky's glasses." He raised his gaze from the bits of his broken soul on the floor, and his chocolate eyes blazed with a rage like no other. "Ah, hells no! You motherfuckers is gonna fucking die!" It was as if he'd been possessed by a lion, and he swung the club so hard he took one of their heads clean off. With a kick and a thunk, he completely crushed a skull. And when a pair of thick arms circled him, he slammed his head back, shattering cartilage. Kerr drop-kicked a pink shirt, and on the way down, managed to sink a bullet into his opponent's throat. The concrete floor was a crimson slip-and-slide at this point, with the amount of blood flying. He used this environment to his advantage, shoes slick as he spun, flinging frat boys into each other in a twisted game of bowling. Rose ran out of bullets and hopped from box to box, liberating another police baton from her other leg. She tapped the two together as if she were about to play a wicked drum solo, and dropped down onto one frat boy's shoulders. He grinned at the woman's crotch right up against his face, and died grinning as she snapped his neck with her strong thighs. Silky got into a tug-of-war with his golf club and screamed, letting go so that the frat dick would slip and fall into a pool of his dead buddies. The pimp immediately hauled another towards him, twisting and tearing the arm clean off with a squelch. Hand firmly planted around the wrist, he used the decapitated shoulder to beat his foe, who was too grossed out by the removed arm to fight back with the club. Silky liberated his legendary weapon from his enemy's grip and swung it in a perfect golfer's arc, taking the frat boy's jaw with it. The bottom hinge of his mouth sailed through the air, skin and blood flapping behind it, and hit the concrete a good distance away, directly in front of a set of shiny black shoes. Chapter 19. It was eerily quiet, the only sounds that of the trio's heavy breathing, and that made the sharp clap even more jarring. The three warriors reunited in the center of the bloodbath, battle-worn and disheveled, and covered in sweat and gore. They faced the source of the noise, and saw a tall, square-jawed man with broad shoulders clapping his hands in stark applause. "Very impressive," he said, and his voice dripped with so much manliness that Rose felt her core clench. "I did not think my army of frat boys would be beaten so easily." He leaned down and gently lifted the jawbone from the floor, holding it up to his eyes for inspection. "Yeah? Well, you best be getting used to disappointment, motherfucker, 'cause you's next," Silky promised, widening his stance. He lowered his chin to shoot their foe a menacing glare, flanked by his teammates in an intimidating triangle. "You have no idea what you're up against." The king of the beach tossed the jawbone aside like a piece of trash and flicked his hand clean of bodily fluids. "I have spent the last 30 years trapped in my own personal void. The only thing that I have done in that time is grow stronger, far stronger than anything this world has ever seen." "I can take him," Kerr murmured under his breath, so only Silky could hear him. "What you talking about, Cracker?" the pimp asked quietly, barely moving his lips so that the king wouldn't know they were whispering as he continued his speech.
I still have 1 shot left,
the recruit replied.
Why the fuck you telling me about it?
Silky hissed.
Shoot the motherfucker and let's go home.
Prepare to meet your end, the king bellowed and spread his arms dramatically. You first, Kerr snapped and raised his gun, firing a quick shot right for the demon's forehead. The king grinned in the face of certain death and raised his hand. The bullet slowed to a stop right in front of his face, and he plucked it out of the air as if it were no more dangerous than a butterfly.
Cracker, Silky hopes you brought your A-game, 'cause Silky thinks you just made him mad,
the pimp warned, as the king turned the bullet over in his hand. He smirked at it, then tossed it up in the air, bringing his hand down on top of it like a volleyball spike. The bullet flew as if shot from a barrel and hit Rose in the shoulder. She flew backwards from the impact, hurled into a pile of boxes behind a crumpled heap of pink-clad bodies.
Rose!
Kerr dove over the corpses to her side, dropping his gun to check her over.
I'll live,
she grunted and pressed her hand hard against the wound.
Go get that son of a bitch.
She raised her green eyes to his sternly, and he nodded, recognizing it as an order from his superior. If that is the best you can do, then you are not worth my time, the king declared, his hands glowing and then bursting into flame. Kerr rejoined Silky, eyes wide at the fiery display of demon magic. He did not like the look of that. You can deal with my army. The king slammed his fist down onto the concrete floor of the warehouse, palm open, and a shockwave of red heat fluttered across the space. The pimp and his recruit recoiled as the wall of warmth flew through them, but recovered in confusion, having expected to be attacked by fire.
Guys?
Rose piped up from behind them, and the two slowly turned to see the corpses on the floor starting to move. Slick bodies writhing against each other to rise again, bits of flesh peeled back from exposed bone, grins wide with shattered teeth and lolling tongues, concave heads, exposed brains, eyeballs drooping from their sockets and swinging about by sinewy nerves. Kerr gulped. Now what? A loud rip and a whir broke through the air, followed by the steady thrum of a chainsaw. All of the living pairs of eyes turned towards an opening between two piles of boxes, leading from a hallway that had been previously uninhabited. What the fuck is that? Kerr's heart pounded in his ears. Flaming demons, zombie frat boys, an agent down, and now somebody was coming at them with a chainsaw. How could this get any worse? Chapter 20. That's TNT, baby. Silky's golden grin made Kerr's heart unclench the tiniest bit when he realized the chainsaw was on their side. He's about to fuck some shit up. A large shadow cast along the floor, a hulking frame holding what looked to be the biggest chainsaw Kerr had ever seen. He cracked his knuckles, ready for the tides to turn for them. Even the zombies seemed to be holding their breath. The shadow grew smaller and smaller as it approached, and Kerr grew more and more confused. When a legitimate midget walked into the warehouse holding a regular-sized chainsaw that looked oversized in his tiny hands, all blood drained from the recruit's face. This was TNT? He was bald, he was buff, and had he not been just 4 feet tall, he might have been intimidating. The zombie frat boys snickered, and the midget narrowed his eyes at them. His steel gaze was so rough around the edges that Kerr blinked, and he could tell this guy had been through some shit. The gaze and the ease at which he held that chainsaw as if he'd cut up 1,000,000 motherfuckers in his life told Kerr that maybe what he'd seen at first glance wasn't accurate.
Oh, you think I'm funny, do ya?
he barked with the air of a man 10 times his size as he strode towards the group of pink shirts, now torn and stained with crimson. In a swift motion, he sliced right through the midsection of the zombie closest to him, spraying blood and intestine everywhere.
Who's next?
The tiny agent yelled, spittle flying from his mouth, and the zombies immediately stopped looking amused. The horde descended on him like a tidal wave, and Kerr took a step forward, but Silky blocked his path with the golf club as severed limbs started flying up out of the pack.
God damn, that is one pissed-off midget.
Kerr raised an eyebrow, and Silky slapped him hard on the back of the head.
They prefer little people, you culturally insensitive honky-ass cracker,
he scolded, and the recruit blinked at him, exasperated.
Now come on,
the pimp ordered.
Let's get that motherfucker.
They turned to face the king, Kerr throwing one more quick glance back at Rose, who seemed to be enjoying the decapitation circus happening in front of her. A flaming volleyball hit Kerr straight in the chest, and he looked down at it in shock before his back hit the cement floor, tearing the wind from his lungs. Silky lunged forward, club raised, as the king spiked another fiery ball at him with expert form. King of the beach, indeed.
You best be keeping your goddamn balls away from Silky, motherfucker,
the pimp declared as he dodged the projectile. The king simply smiled and bumped 2 underhand serves in succession, sending multiple attacks. Silky ducked and rolled and dove out of the way as he advanced, slowly gaining ground until he was within clubbing distance of the king. He swung in a fierce uppercut, and the slithery demon managed to dodge gracefully, moving like an animal. Fire and steel, spike versus club, they danced, and finally the king managed to grab hold of the 9-iron in his large fist. His skin started to sizzle and spit at the contact, but he merely grinned, free hand exploding into little mushroom clouds of orange and yellow. His flaming fist hit Silky like a battering ram, flinging the pimp clean across the warehouse into a wall of cardboard, effectively burying him in kindling. His grin curled up into a sinister smile as he charged up another volleyball, ready to rain napalm down on his enemy.
Hey, King Pussy, you want some of me?
Kerr snapped, and the king flung the ball at him instead, knocking him back to the ground. Too easy, the king sneered. TNT cut through the last few frat boys, rendering even their zombie forms useless, and headed over to Rose. He grasped the front of his tight t-shirt and jerked it down, ripping the thin fabric clean off his chest.
Been a while, Rosie,
he smiled, and she returned the expression, gratefully accepting the fabric. She wrapped her shoulder as tight as she could and tied it off, satisfied with her makeshift bandage. She inclined her head towards the king, who was gearing up to attack Silky again. TNT shot her a wicked grin and crept up to Kerr, who was slowly sitting up. She got to her feet, shuffling low to the ground and taking cover behind some boxes. She held one of her sticks in her good hand, ready to leap in if she was needed. The king turned back to Silky with a malicious smile. The pimp stood up and brushed himself off, wrinkling his nose a bit at the singed suede.
You be owing Silky a new jacket, cracker,
he said, wrapping his hands around the golf club tightly.
Silky's gonna enjoy whooping your ass.
There is nothing you can do to me,
the king declared with a laugh, spreading his arms in incredulity.
I have waited 3 decades to unleash my fury onto this world, and I am surely not going to be brought down by the likes of you.
We's gonna be seeing about that,
Silky said with a sly grin, dodging 2 more volleyballs.
You cannot dodge my balls forever.
The king raised his chin in defiance.
Ain't gonna have to.
The pimp dusted off his shoulder like he'd already won, and the king snarled, firing off another. Silky lifted his club with lightning speed, winding up and smacking it like a baseball. This caught the king off guard, and he took the ball in the chest, stunning him to his knees. During this, Kerr had TNT by the feet and was swinging him around in a tight circle, chainsaw growling away. TNT opened his mouth, a loud battle cry bellowing across the massive expanse. Kerr let go of the little soldier's feet, and the midget with the chainsaw flew across the room like an arrow. The king of the beach turned just in time to take the chainsaw right to the face, blood splattering out in a wide arc as the top of his head slid clean off. TNT landed gracefully on his feet as the legendary demon's body fell, disengaging the saw. An eerie silence fell over the warehouse. "Motherfucker," Silky said and kicked the corpse a few times in the ribs. He turned to Kerr and slapped a firm hand on his shoulder. "Good job, my cracker." "Death by midget tossing," the recruit confirmed with a nod, offering the pimp a hopeful smile. "That one definitely gets some style points," Silky replied with a grin. "To show you my gratitude, Silky's gonna let you pick out your own hoe." "How about you just stop calling me cracker?" He raised an eyebrow, and his boss chuckled at his pronunciation. "Whatever you's liking, honky." Silky's grin widened. No, just call me Kerr," the recruit insisted, waving his hands in front of him. "Just once. I won't tell anyone, I promise. I just want to know you have at least a little respect for me after all this." "You did a fine job, Kerr," Silky said seriously, brow furrowed, and his recruit smiled brightly. "Wipe that shit off your face and let's get the fuck out of here." He shoved Kerr's shoulder, who immediately went stone-faced. But as soon as the pimp turned to check on Rose, the recruit let the smile erupt across his features once again. He puffed out his chest and followed his boss, who appreciated him, over to where TNT was helping Rose to her feet. "Damn, baby, you fine," the midget smirked. "Am I tall enough to ride or what?" She rolled her eyes and brushed his hand off of her arm, pulling out her cell phone and leading the way out of the warehouse at a brisk pace. "What'd I say?" TNT opened his free hand in question, and Kerr chuckled. "Don't bother barking up that tree, man. She's ice cold," he offered, and the midget looked up at him with an incredulous expression. "Maybe for an apple pie motherfucker like you," he shot back, and Kerr crossed his arms with a scowl as Silky trilled a laugh. They started to pick their way through the heaps of dead frat boy zombies, Silky's pastel loafers somehow still clean. Kerr wondered if that was another angel power, the ability to stay perfectly polished even during a chainsaw battle. "I wonder what our next job will be," he thought out loud. "Silky don't care," the pimp shrugged. "As long as old Silky gets to hurt some fuckers. That's all that matters." Epilogue. Deep in the belly of the warehouse, the body of the king of the beach floated in a crimson ocean with only half a head. He was cold and useless now, except for the one pinky finger of his right hand that twitched slightly. The head of a rusty 9-iron smashed down on that hand, obliterating it to smithereens. "Oh, hell no," Silky grunted as he continued to bring his legendary weapon down into the body of the demon. "We ain't having that shit." When there was nothing left but a pulpy mess inside the pool of blood, Silky set down the club like a cane and spread his feet into a power stance. He raised his chin, sunglasses reflecting in the fluorescent light as he grinned, revealing his glittering gold teeth. His jacket blew gently in the breeze, and he inclined his head to the Mexican man standing there with the comically large fan. "Muy bueno, Enrique,"